He found her at 11:47 at night, alone at a bus stop that hadn't seen a bus in 3 hours, sitting in a wheelchair with snow building up on her shoulders like she was already a statue of something that used to matter. She wasn't crying. That was the thing that stopped him. She wasn't crying, and somehow that was worse than if she had been. Ethan Miller had exactly 14 minutes to get home to his sick daughter, a bag of children's Tylenol in his coat pocket, and not a single reason in the world to stop. He stopped anyway. That decision would cost him everything he thought he understood about his own life, and give him back something he didn't know he'd lost. If this story moves you, hit the like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The pharmacy on Kedzie Avenue closed at 11, which meant Ethan had to drive to the one on Western, which meant he didn't leave until 11:30, which meant he was on foot through 6 inches of snow on a sidewalk the city hadn't bothered to salt, moving as fast as he could without actually running, because if he ran, he'd slip, and if he slipped, he'd drop the bag, and he couldn't afford another bottle tonight. His phone said it was 14 degrees. He'd left Maya with Mrs. Okafor from 4B, who was 71 years old and had her own needs to worry about, but never said no when he knocked on her door in a panic. Maya was 5. She'd had a fever since noon, 102.4 when he checked the last time, creeping up through the afternoon the way fevers do with kids, slow and deliberate and terrifying. He'd called the pediatric nurse line from work, and the woman on the phone had been calm in that professional way that made him feel both better and worse at the same time. "It's likely viral," she'd said. "Alternate Tylenol and Motrin every 4 hours. Keep her hydrated. Bring her in tomorrow if it goes above 104. If it goes above 104. Like that was a reassuring thing to say. He turned onto his block, Cortlandt Street, the part of Logan Square that hadn't been fully gentrified yet, where the coffee shops ended and the nail salons and dollar stores began. And that's when he saw her. He almost didn't. The bus shelter was set back from the streetlight, and the snow was falling in a way that made everything past 20 feet look like television static. But something caught his eye. A shape that was wrong for the hour. A figure that wasn't moving. Ethan slowed. She was in a wheelchair. That was the first thing he registered. She was in a wheelchair at a bus stop on a street where the last bus had come and gone hours ago. He knew because the 72 didn't run past 9 on weeknights. A fact he knew because he used to take it before he got the car, back when things were different. She had snow on her shoulders. Not a dusting. Actual accumulation, maybe a quarter inch, which meant she'd been there long enough for it to build up, and she hadn't moved enough to knock it off. She was looking straight ahead. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there on the sidewalk with the pharmacy bag in his hand and the wind coming off the lake, and he thought about Maya upstairs with her fever, and he thought about Mrs. Okafor who needed to get back to her own apartment, and he thought about the fact that it was almost midnight, and he had work in the morning, and he had exactly enough in his checking account to cover rent and not quite enough left over to feel comfortable. He thought about walking past. The thought lasted maybe 4 seconds. "Hey," he said, coming toward the shelter. "Hey, are you okay?" She turned her head slowly. The motion was controlled, deliberate, like she was rationing her energy. She was younger than he expected. Maybe his age, maybe a little younger. Dark hair that had gone damp from the snow. Her face was, he didn't have a better word for it, composed. Not calm, exactly. Composed, the way a person looks when they've decided that whatever is happening to them, they are not going to let it show. "I'm fine," she said. Her accent was slight but unmistakable. Eastern European, he thought. Russian, maybe. "You're covered in snow," he said. "I'm aware." "How long have you been sitting here?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a moment with eyes that were doing a very rapid and not entirely friendly assessment. He was used to that look. He got it sometimes at work, being the only black man in a project meeting, people deciding in the first 3 seconds whether he was supposed to be there. "A while," she said. "The 72 stopped running at 9. "I know that now." Ethan looked up and down the street. There was nobody else out. One car went past without slowing. The snow kept falling. "Is someone coming for you?" The pause before she answered was a fraction of a second too long. "Yes." "Are they coming soon?" Another pause. "I'm not sure." He didn't push it. He looked at her wheelchair. It was a good one, he noticed. Not a hospital-issue thing, but something that looked custom, lightweight, with ergonomic handles and a seat cushion that was now soaking wet from the snow. She was wearing a coat that was probably expensive and entirely wrong for standing around outside in February. More of a business coat, the kind of thing you wore from a car to a building. "I have to get home," he said. "My daughter's sick, but I can't." He stopped, started over. "There's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks from here. I could push you there. You could wait inside where it's warm." "I don't need you to push me." "Right, sorry." He stepped back, giving her the space. "But the diner's an option, it's warmer." She looked at him again. That same measuring look, but something in it had shifted slightly, like a door opening the tiniest bit. "I can manage my own chair," she said. Her jaw was tight. He couldn't tell if it was from cold or pride or both. "I know, I just meant—" He exhaled. "Look, I live on this block, 3rd floor. If you need to come in and make a call, use a phone, whatever, that's an option too. I'm not—" He didn't know how to finish the sentence in a way that didn't sound like something she should be suspicious of. "My daughter's homesick. My elderly neighbor is watching her. I'm not trying to—" "I understand," she said quietly. "You're not trying to be a threat." "I'm really not." She looked down at her lap for a moment. Her hands were in her lap, and he saw that they were shaking slightly, very slightly, barely visible. And he wasn't sure if it was the cold or something else. "I was supposed to be picked up," she said, her voice flat. "The car didn't come." "Tonight?" 3 hours ago." Ethan stared at her. "Someone was supposed to pick you up 3 hours ago, and they didn't come." "Yes. And you've been sitting here for 3 hours. The phone I had is dead." She said it without visible emotion. "And I was not certain which direction to go." He looked at her wheelchair and then at the sidewalks around them. Uneven, poorly shoveled, one of them completely blocked by a frozen snowbank. And he understood what she meant. It wasn't that she didn't know the city. It was that the city, at that hour, in that weather, was not navigable from a wheelchair by someone alone. "Okay," Ethan said. He ran a hand over his face. "Okay, come inside. We'll figure out. You can charge your phone, make a call, whatever you need. Come inside." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Ethan Miller. I live in 3C. You can see the building from here," he pointed. "Right there." She looked at the building, then back at him. "Anastasia," she said. "Anastasia Volkova." "Okay, Anastasia." He moved toward the ramp cut into the curb, checking the snow depth. "The sidewalk is a mess, but I think we can get through. You want to try it yourself, or—" "I'll manage," she said, and she gripped the wheels and started moving. He walked alongside her without touching the chair, close enough to catch her if something went wrong, and they crossed Cortlandt Street together in the snow. He didn't know the full shape of what he was bringing home. That was the honest truth. He was a man who needed to get back to his sick kid, and there was a person in distress who needed a warm room and a phone charger, and the math of that was simple enough that he didn't think too hard about it. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, not yet, was that Anastasia Volkova had, until 11 months ago, been the CEO of Meridian Group, an international logistics and property investment firm headquartered in Geneva, with satellite offices in Moscow, Dubai, and New York. That at the age of 29, she had been the youngest person to hold that position in the company's 40-year history, elevated after her father's sudden health crisis, already having spent 6 years essentially running operations from the inside while her father's name sat above hers on the masthead. He didn't know that the accident had happened on a highway outside of Kyiv, that she'd been traveling for a board presentation that had been, in retrospect, less important than the people who scheduled it had made it seem, that the car had skidded on ice, a mundane, stupid, ordinary ice patch, and gone over a concrete divider, that the driver had walked away with a broken wrist, that Anastasia had not walked away at all. He didn't know about the 6 weeks in the hospital. The diagnosis, incomplete spinal cord injury at T6, which meant partial sensation, partial function, a body that was present but rearranged, that no longer operated by the rules she'd spent 30 years learning. The surgeries, the infection that came after the second surgery, the physical therapy that had taught her to do everything except the one thing she wanted, which was stand up. He didn't know about the family meetings that happened in the hospital waiting room and in lawyers' offices, and that she hadn't been part of because no one had thought to include her. About her Uncle Victor, who had sat on the Meridian board for 12 years and who had always been friendly to her face and who had moved, with a speed that suggested considerable preparation to have her declared temporarily incapacitated under Swiss corporate law while she was still in the ICU. He didn't know about the apartment in New York that had been in the company's name, the company car, the company accounts. The way Victor's lawyers had argued with great legal precision that an executive incapable of traveling independently and managing her own affairs could not adequately fulfill her fiduciary duties. The settlement offer that her own lawyer had told her was the best she could expect given her situation. He didn't know that she'd come to Chicago because a former colleague, someone she'd worked with in New York, had offered her a place to stay. That the colleague had, in the 3 weeks before Anastasia arrived, changed his mind, declined to say exactly why, and arranged for a car to pick her up from the airport and take her to a temporary accommodation at a women's shelter that had a room for people with mobility needs. He didn't know that the car had been arranged by that colleague's assistant, and that the assistant had made a mistake with the address, and that Anastasia had sat in the cold for 3 hours, too proud or too exhausted, or simply too depleted to cry about it. He didn't know any of this. He just knew she needed a warm room. Mrs. Okafor opened the door to 4B before he could knock, which meant she'd been listening for him, which made him feel guilty all over again. "She's sleeping," Mrs. Okafor said, looking from Ethan to Anastasia and then back to Ethan with an expression that was not quite a question. "Fever came down a little." "Thank God." He held up the pharmacy bag. "I got the Tylenol. I gave her some of mine. Children's Tylenol. I keep it for when my grandchildren visit. Don't look at me like that. It wasn't expired. I wasn't looking at you like anything." He leaned in and hugged her quickly, carefully, the way he always did, conscious of her bad hip. "Thank you. For real." She was looking at Anastasia with an expression that had moved past curiosity into something more clinical. Mrs. Okafor was retired from nursing. She had that habit of assessment. "Who's this?" "Anastasia. She needed help. She's going to use the phone and then I'll help her figure out where she needs to go." Mrs. Okafor looked at Anastasia for another moment. "You're frozen," she said. "I'm fine," Anastasia said. Mrs. Okafor made a sound that communicated exactly how much she thought of that answer. "I'll get the extra blanket," she said to Ethan. "And put the kettle on before you do anything else. This woman needs tea." "She said she's fine. I don't care what she said." Mrs. Okafor turned back into her apartment. "Bring her in here while you check on your daughter." Sam. Maya was asleep on her side, her breathing a little rough but regular, her hair damp against the pillow. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment and did that thing he always did, that involuntary full-body exhale that he couldn't quite explain, something that only happened when he looked at her, like his whole nervous system took attendance and relaxed when she showed up. He felt her forehead with the back of his hand, still warm, but not burning. He pulled her blanket up without waking her. There was a drawing on her bedside table. She'd been drawing when she got home from kindergarten before the fever took hold, and she'd left it out. It was a house with a very large sun and 3 figures of dramatically different sizes. The tallest one had curly hair, the smallest one had yellow crayon scribbled over her head, which Ethan had learned meant Maya was having a good hair day in the drawing. The middle figure was shorter than him and taller than Maya, and it was just an outline, no features filled in, no color. He stared at that drawing for a moment, in the dark, then went back to the living room. Anastasia was in his kitchen. He wasn't sure how she'd gotten there. The apartment wasn't designed with a wheelchair in mind, and there was a lip between the hallway and the kitchen that he now saw she'd handled by tilting the front wheels slightly and rolling over it with practiced efficiency. She was holding a mug of tea that Mrs. Okafor must have made, and she was looking at the collection of crayon drawings attached to the refrigerator with magnets. She didn't say anything when he came in. "Her name's Maya," he said. "She's 5. She's going through a drawing phase." Anastasia looked at a drawing of what appeared to be a cat with 17 legs. "That is a cat," she insists. "I see." He sat down at the table. The kitchen was small. Everything in the apartment was small, and having another adult in it made it feel smaller in a way that wasn't exactly bad, just unfamiliar. He'd gotten used to the space being his and Maya's. "Do you have a phone charger?" Anastasia asked. "Yeah, what kind?" "USB-C. He went and got it. She plugged in a phone that was, he noticed, an expensive model, cracked screen like it had been dropped or both. She held it while it powered on. Whatever she was feeling watching that loading screen, it didn't show on her face. He made himself a cup of coffee because there was no version of tonight where he was going to sleep anytime soon. "Where are you trying to get to?" he asked. "Where were they supposed to take you tonight?" She told him the name of the shelter. He knew roughly where it was, other side of the city, not a neighborhood he knew well. "I can call a rideshare," he said, "or we can—" The car would fit the chair, right? "Some of them have— The accessible vehicles take longer to book," she said, "and I don't have access to the accounts I normally use. The cards I have are— There were some complications." He looked at her. She was looking at her phone screen with the same composed expression, but her jaw was very tight. "Okay," he said. "I have some cash. I can cover it. I'm not accepting money from you. It's a cab fare. I'm not accepting it." He looked at her. She looked back. There was something in her eyes. Not anger, exactly. More like a person who had spent the last 11 months watching the scaffolding of their life come down piece by piece, and who had decided at some point that accepting help was the same as acknowledging that the scaffolding was gone. He understood that, actually. He understood it better than he would have liked to. "It's midnight," he said. "It's 14 degrees. The shelter— I don't know how responsive they are to last-minute intakes at midnight. I'll call them." "Okay, call them." He pushed the coffee cup toward the center of the table, not toward her, just to have something to do with his hands. "And if they can take you tonight, I'll drive you, or we'll book a ride, whatever works. But if they can't—" He paused. "I have a couch. It's not comfortable, but it's warm and it's not a bus shelter." She looked at him with that measuring look again. He'd already identified it as her default response to anything that required trusting another person. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. It wasn't confrontational. It was a genuine question, asked in the quiet voice of someone who had learned the hard way to be suspicious of kindness. "Because it's cold outside," he said. "That's the whole reason." She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked down at her phone and started dialing. "Bope or she." The shelter could take her in the morning, not tonight. The woman on the phone was apologetic. The intake coordinator wasn't available until 8 a.m., and the night staff didn't have authorization to process emergency placements without a referral. She said this twice. Anastasia listened without reacting, said thank you very much, and ended the call. She set the phone on the table. "Morning," she said. "Okay." Ethan got up. "Let me get you some sheets for the couch." "You don't have to." "Anastasia." He said her name and she stopped, maybe because of the way he said it. Not sharp, not impatient, just direct. "I have a couch. You need somewhere to sleep. This is not complicated." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you." "Don't mention it." He went to the hall closet. "Seriously, I'd rather you didn't." He heard something that might have been a very small, very reluctant exhale of something like a laugh. He wasn't sure. Getting Anastasia settled for the night took 20 minutes and 2 attempts to figure out the bathroom situation, which was the most logistically complicated and least comfortable conversation Ethan had had in recent memory. The bathroom door was narrow, and the sink was positioned in a way that made it genuinely difficult for the wheelchair to get alongside it. She had techniques. She had a whole system, he realized, watching her work with an efficiency that spoke of months of necessity, but the apartment simply wasn't set up for it. "This is a problem," she said flatly, assessing the bathroom. "I know, I'm sorry, I've never had to. I never thought about it." Most people don't. There was no blame in how she said it, just a statement of fact about the world. They figured it out. He left her alone and went to check on Maya, and then stood in the hallway outside the bathroom until she knocked on the door to let him know she was done. He noticed she'd put everything exactly back the way it had been, which told him something about her, though he wasn't sure exactly what. He made up the couch with a fitted sheet and a blanket from the closet, and got a pillow from his own bed. She transferred from the chair to the couch with the same methodical efficiency. He made himself look somewhere else, sensing without being told that she didn't want an audience. "The couch is yours as long as you need it," he said. "I mean tonight, and then tomorrow we'll figure out—" "Tonight," she said. "Just tonight." "Right." He turned off the overhead light and left the lamp in the corner on, low. He was at the doorway to the hall when she spoke. "Your daughter," she said. "She'll be okay." He turned. She was lying on the couch, the blanket pulled up, looking at the ceiling. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think so. Children are resilient." "They have to be," he paused. "You should try to sleep." She didn't say anything. "Anastasia." "What?" "Try to sleep." A pause. "All right." He went to bed. Maya woke at 4 a.m. with the specific urgency of a 5-year-old who has located a crisis and wants to share it immediately. "Daddy?" She was standing in his doorway. She'd started doing that, materializing in doorways. He had no idea how she got out of bed without making noise, but she always did. "Daddy, there's a lady on the couch." He was awake before she finished the sentence because that was what parenting did to your sleep. It was never fully sleep. It was sleep with one ear always open. "I know," he said. "Come here." He held up the blanket and she climbed in beside him, cold feet and all. She needed somewhere to stay tonight. Her name is Anastasia. "Is she sick like me?" "No, she just needed help." Maya considered this. "Is she going to be here in the morning?" "Yeah, for a little while." Another consideration. "Can I see her?" "In the morning." "But morning, Maya." She was quiet for about 45 seconds, which was her way of communicating that she'd accepted the terms under protest. Then she said, "Daddy, she looked sad." He was quiet. "I know, Bug," he said. "I think she has been, a little. We should make her breakfast." "Maybe. Go to sleep." She didn't sleep immediately. He could feel her working something over the way she did, her small body pressed against his side and her mind very clearly still running. "Daddy? What? Is it okay that she's here?" "Yeah, baby, it's okay." She settled then, the way she did when she'd gotten the things she needed, which wasn't always an answer, but sometimes just the particular tone of a voice. He lay in the dark with her warm weight against him and listened to the sound of the city outside and thought about the woman on his couch and the series of decisions or disasters that had put her there. He thought about his own disasters, the way the world arranged itself differently after loss, how spaces that used to make sense started to feel arbitrary, and how you found yourself making decisions you never anticipated, not because you were brave or stupid, but because the alternative was standing in the dark doing nothing, and even he knew that wasn't the same as being safe. He didn't think about the future. He was bad at that since Rebecca died. He'd gotten very good at just the next hour, the next task, the next thing directly in front of him. Tonight, the thing directly in front of him had been a woman in a bus shelter in the snow. Tomorrow, it would be something else. He closed his eyes. The morning was a negotiation of small disasters, as most mornings were. Maya's fever had broken, 99.1 when he checked, which was nearly normal and which made something loosen in his chest. But she was still tired and a little clingy, and she wanted juice, but not that juice, and she wanted toast, but not that toast, and she kept asking about the lady on the couch. Anastasia was awake when he came out of the kitchen at 7. She was already sitting up, already in the wheelchair. She'd managed the transfer alone while he was asleep, which he filed away as another data point about her that he didn't fully have language for yet. She was on her phone. She looked, if possible, more composed than she had the night before, which he suspected was a kind of armor she was very practiced at putting on. "The shelter opens at 8, she said without looking up. "Right." He handed her a cup of coffee. He'd made enough for 2, it wasn't a big gesture, and she took it without comment. "You want breakfast? I'm making eggs." "You don't have to. I'm making eggs for me and Maya. It's eggs. Do you want some or not?" A pause. "Yes. Thank you." Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with owl print and her hair going in approximately 9 directions, and she looked at Anastasia with the undisguised, unfiltered attention that 5-year-olds deploy when they've decided someone is interesting. "Hi," Maya said. Anastasia looked up from her phone. For the first time since he'd met her, the composed expression shifted slightly. Not much, just something around the eyes. Some micro-adjustment that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Hello," she said. "I'm Maya." "I know, your father told me." "Are you better?" Maya asked. "From being sad last night?" Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Maya, it's all right." Anastasia said. She looked at Maya directly, without condescension, which he noticed. A lot of adults talked down to Maya. This one didn't. A little, she said. I think a little better. Maya accepted this. I was sick, she announced, but I'm better. Daddy got medicine. That's good. You should feel better before you go back to school. I know. Maya looked at the wheelchair with the frank curiosity of someone who hasn't yet learned to pretend not to look. Why are you in that? Maya, he started, but Anastasia raised one hand slightly. It's fine, she said. She looked at Maya. I hurt my back. It makes it hard to walk, so I use this instead. Like a special chair? Yes, like a special chair. Does it hurt? Sometimes. My back hurts sometimes too, Maya said, with the profound gravity of a 5-year-old finding common ground. When I sleep weird. That happens to everyone, Anastasia said. Yeah, Maya nodded. Then she climbed up onto the couch beside Anastasia. Not on her lap, but close, the way she did when she decided she liked someone, and said, Can I see it? And reached toward the wheelchair handle. Maya, Ethan said. You can touch it, Anastasia said. Just don't try to move it without telling me first. Okay. Maya examined the wheel with great seriousness. It's kind of like a bike. A little like a bike, yes. Do you go fast? When I need to. Maya looked at her with an expression he recognized. That particular spark of warm regard that his daughter extended to very few people and always immediately. She'd given it to Mrs. Okafor on day 1. She'd given it to her kindergarten teacher. She'd given it years ago to Rebecca in those first minutes on the day they'd brought her home, this small, red, furious creature who had opened her eyes and looked at her mother with that expression that meant you and kept looking. I like your hair, Maya told Anastasia. Thank you. Anastasia looked at Maya's hair, the 9 directions of it. I like yours, Maya beamed. Daddy says it's a project. He's not wrong. He turned back to the eggs before either of them saw him smiling. Assad. He drove her to the shelter at 8:30. The intake took 40 minutes. He waited in the car. He didn't know why he waited. He could have dropped her at the door. That would have been reasonable. That would have been more than enough. But something made him put the car in park and leave the engine running for the heat and just wait. When she came back out, her face told him what had happened before she said a word. They don't have an accessible room available, she said. There's a waiting list. He stared at the windshield. How long? They weren't specific. A week, maybe 2. And in the meantime? There's another shelter on the north side. They have a room, but... She stopped. He glanced at her. She was looking at the shelter building with an expression he didn't have a word for. The room is on the 2nd floor. There's an elevator, but it's old, and the staff mentioned it breaks down. He thought about her alone in a 2nd-floor room with a broken elevator between her and the exit. Come back to the apartment, he said. She turned to look at him. It's not... He put the car in drive, then put it back in park. Look, I know it's not ideal. The bathroom situation is a problem, and the couch is terrible, and there's a 5-year-old who's going to talk to you constantly, but it's not a broken elevator, and it's not an emergency room or a bus stop. So... He shrugged. Come back until something better opens up. Silence. I can pay, she said. I have... There are some funds accessible. I can pay. You don't need to pay me. I'm not going to live in someone's apartment for free. Then pay me, whatever. We'll figure out a number. He pulled the car out of the space. Come back. She didn't say anything for most of the drive. He didn't push it. At the corner of Cortlandt and Kedzie, she said, I'll need a place to keep my things. In the bedroom, if possible. I can't leave them in the living room. You can use Maya's room. There's a corner. Is she okay with that? She'll love it. He turned on to Cortlandt. She'll probably reorganize your stuff. I'll speak to her about that. She's 5. She doesn't take feedback well. Anastasia was quiet. Then, very quietly, my little cousin was like that. He didn't ask about it, just drove. The apartment on a Tuesday morning was different from what it was at midnight. Smaller, in a way, because the daylight showed everything that the dark had softened. The water stain on the kitchen ceiling from the leak 2 winters ago that the landlord had patched but not properly. The second-hand couch with the cushion that always slid out. The mismatched furniture that he and Rebecca had accumulated piece by piece and that he'd never gotten around to replacing or letting go of, because both options required a decision he hadn't been ready to make. Anastasia moved through it in her chair with the same careful efficiency, making mental notes he couldn't read. He moved the rolling cart from the corner of the bedroom that had been his and cleared space for her things. He had to take down a box from the closet to make room, and that meant handling the box, which meant seeing Rebecca's handwriting on the label, Winter Stuff/E, and he let himself look at it for exactly 2 seconds before he put it on the shelf in the hall closet and went back to making space. Anastasia brought in 2 bags and 1 hard case that had a lock on it. He didn't ask about the case. She positioned things with the same methodical precision that was beginning to feel like a personality trait rather than just a habit. "I'll be quiet in the morning," she said. "I wake early. So does Maya. She'll find you." "I figured." A pause. "She's fine. I don't mind children." He looked at her. She was arranging something in her bag and didn't look up. "Thanks," he said, "for being patient with her. She's easy to be patient with." He left her to settle in and went to make Maya's lunch and think about nothing in particular, which didn't work. So he thought about the fact that he had a stranger living in his apartment and that he knew almost nothing about her, and that for some reason this felt less strange than it probably should have. He thought about the drawing on Maya's nightstand, the outline figure in the middle, the one with no color yet, no features, just the shape of a person. He did not think about what that meant. He made a sandwich and cut it into triangles and put it in the fridge for later, and he went to tell Maya that Anastasia was going to stay with them for a little while. Maya's response was to immediately go find her drawing and add something to the middle figure, and when he asked her what she was adding, she showed him. A small circle for a face, and then she thought about it and added dark crayon around the head, carefully, in loops. "That's her hair," Maya said, very matter-of-fact. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Yeah, I can see that." He stood there with Maya's drawing in his hand and the sound of movement from the other room where Anastasia was settling in, and the city outside the window going about its business without any awareness of the particular small configuration of people inside this one apartment on this one block who were, all 3 of them, in the process of figuring out what shape a life could take after everything you thought it was supposed to look like had turned out to be wrong. He didn't know what came next. He put the drawing back on the table and went to make coffee, and he let the next thing be just that, the next thing. The first week was an exercise in logistics and quiet discomfort, which was, Ethan had come to understand, what most of adult life actually was. He moved the rolling cart out of the corner of the bedroom entirely after Anastasia pointed out, without drama, that it blocked her from reaching the window. He raised the bathroom mirror by 4 inches, using bolts from the hardware store and a YouTube tutorial. He bought a small tension rod and hung it lower on the shower wall so she could reach it without having to ask for help. And he did this on a Thursday afternoon while she was on a phone call, so she came back and found it done and didn't have to respond to it directly, which he suspected was what she preferred. She didn't thank him for that one. He hadn't expected her to. What he'd expected when he thought about it at all, which he tried not to, because thinking about things too far in advance had started to feel like borrowing trouble, was that she would stay for a few days until the shelter called with an available room, and then she would go. And that would be that. A strange week, a thing he'd tell no one about. The shelter called on day 4. She came out of the bedroom with her phone in her lap, and the way she moved, that usual efficiency, the small, precise motions, was unchanged, but something in her face was off by a degree. "They have a room," she said. "Good." He was at the sink doing dishes. He turned off the water. "When?" "They need an answer today. The woman said she can hold it until 5. He checked the clock on the microwave. It was 2:15. "Okay, you want help with your bags?" She didn't answer immediately. He turned around. She was looking at the kitchen table, at the plate of crackers and apple slices he'd put out earlier for Maya's after-school snack, which Maya had eaten about half of and decorated the other half into a face with raisin eyes and a strawberry mouth, because she was 5 and couldn't leave anything alone. "The room is on the 2nd floor, Anastasia said. "You mentioned that, the elevator." "Yes." A pause. "I spoke to someone else there this morning, one of the residents. She said the elevator has been broken for about 6 days. They're waiting on a part." He leaned against the counter. "So you'd be on the 2nd floor with no working elevator." "For now. And there's no timeline on the part." She didn't say anything. She was still looking at the plate. He had the sense she'd already made a decision and was doing something uncomfortable, which was explaining it to another person. "I don't need to stay here," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not using this as leverage. I can figure something else out." "What's something else?" "There are extended stay hotels. There are, with accessible rooms, in your price range, whatever that is right now." Her jaw did that thing where it went slightly tight. "I'll manage." "I know you'll manage. You'd manage in a bus shelter in February. You've made that very clear." He picked up a dish towel. "My point isn't whether you can handle something. My point is whether you have to." She looked at him then. "The bathroom works," he said. "It's not perfect, but it works. Maya likes you." He paused. "She told Mrs. Okafor you were, quote, really nice and also tall, which is interesting because you're not particularly tall, but that's 5-year-old math. The couch is still terrible, but we can—" He thought about it. "She could share with me. She does sometimes anyway. You could take the bedroom." Silence. "You're offering me your bedroom. You can't do the bathroom transfer from couch level. The height is wrong." He said it practically, which was the only way he knew how to say anything about the physical realities of her situation without it coming out wrong. "The bed is better." She studied him for a long moment with that look that seemed to calculate things he didn't have full access to. "I'll pay more," she said. "We can talk about that." "I'm not negotiating. I'll pay more, or I'm going to the hotel." "Fine, pay more." "How much more?" "I don't know." "What's fair?" "I don't know what your rent is." 1,400? "I'll pay 700. "That's too much." "It's half." "You're not getting half the apartment." "I'm getting the bedroom and bathroom and kitchen and access to your living room. That's more than half." He looked at her. "You really negotiate like this about everything?" "I used to do it professionally," she said, and it was the flattest, most unself-pitying statement of loss he'd ever heard a person make, and it hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. 350, he said. 500. 4. Deal, she said immediately. He had the distinct impression he'd been played. He called his mother that Sunday and she asked how things were going and he said fine. And she asked about Maya and he said she was good. The fever was gone. She was back at school. His mother asked if he was eating and he said yes. She asked if he was sleeping and he paused a half second too long and she said Ethan, in the particular tone that meant she'd already diagnosed the problem. Things are fine, he said. There's someone staying in the apartment, a woman. It's a long story. The silence on the other end of the line had a texture to it. It's not like that, he said. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. I was simply processing, his mother said with great dignity. He told her a condensed version of it. The bus stop, the bus shelter being unavailable, the logistics. He left out the part about Anastasia's background, partly because it wasn't his to share, and partly because he didn't actually know most of it yet. Is she a good person? His mother asked. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Is she good with Maya? Maya's obsessed with her. Then what's the problem? There's no problem. Then why do you sound like there's a problem? He ran a hand over his head. He was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter in the same spot he always leaned, and from where he stood he could see through to the living room where Anastasia was sitting by the window with a laptop. Someone had wired her a small amount of money, he didn't know from whom, enough to replace the cracked screen, and she was working on something. She worked most of the day, quietly. He didn't know what she was working on and didn't ask. It's strange, he said, keeping his voice down. Having another person here, I'm not used to it. You haven't been used to it for 3 years. I know. Maybe strange isn't bad, his mother said. He didn't answer. How does she take her coffee? His mother asked. What? I'm just curious. As a conversational question. Black, he said, before he could stop himself. With a little bit of sugar, but she'll deny the sugar if you mention it. His mother was quiet in a way that meant she was smiling. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, baby. He hung up and looked at the living room and felt something he was too tired to examine. The tension came from small things, not big ones. She left cabinet doors open. Not all of them, and not carelessly. It was a functional thing, he figured out after 2 days, because reaching up to close them was harder from the chair's height, and she was trying to minimize unnecessary exertion. He started closing them himself without saying anything. She noticed but didn't acknowledge it, which was the pattern of most things between them. She was meticulous about common spaces, more so than he was, if he was honest. She wiped down the kitchen counter after she used it. She kept her chair out of the living room's traffic lines with a precise awareness of the paths people walked, which Maya did not share and which led to several collisions in the first week that Maya found hilarious, and that Anastasia accepted with a patience that impressed him. She worked long hours, which he recognized as someone with a project burning in her, though he didn't know its shape. She was on calls sometimes. He could hear the murmur of Russian through the bedroom door, and occasionally English, a different quality of English than she used in the apartment, more formal, more careful. She always had the door shut for these. He gave her that. He made Maya understand, as much as you can make a 5-year-old understand anything, that when the door was shut, you knocked, you waited for an answer, you did not simply walk in. Maya knocked and waited approximately 60% of the time, which was, honestly, better than he'd hoped. The first real problem was a Wednesday morning when he overslept his alarm by 40 minutes. He'd been up late dealing with a project deadline. He did project management for a mid-sized construction firm, work he could do partially from home, which was the only reason the current arrangement worked at all. And when his eyes opened and the clock said 7:48, Maya's drop-off was at 8:15, and she hadn't been bathed or fed or dressed. He got up so fast he knocked the glass of water off the nightstand. He came out of the bedroom in a state of controlled panic to find Maya at the kitchen table in her school clothes. Not the right school clothes. She was in the purple leggings that weren't allowed, and the shirt with the iron-on patch that said rock star. But it was clothes, she was dressed, and Anastasia was at the counter with a bowl of cereal in front of Maya and a piece of toast and a cup of juice. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway. "She knocked on my door at 7, Anastasia said, not turning around. She was getting something from the lower cabinet. She'd rearranged the lower cabinets in her first week without asking, which had initially annoyed him until he realized her system was actually better than his. "She said you were sleeping and she was hungry. I overslept my alarm. I gathered." She set a mug of coffee on the counter at his usual spot. "The leggings aren't allowed, apparently. She was very clear that they are, but I suspect she's not telling the truth." "They're not allowed," Ethan said. He looked at Maya. "Maya." "They're comfortable," Maya said, with the reasoning of someone who has thought carefully about her defense. "We talked about the rule. The rule is dumb. It's still a rule." He came to the counter and drank the coffee, which was perfect, and he was not going to say anything about that right now. Eat fast and then go change into the jeans. Maya ate fast. Maya went to change with approximately the enthusiasm of someone being asked to dismantle something they built. Ethan stood in the kitchen with his coffee and looked at Anastasia, who was back at the counter eating her own toast and reading something on her phone. "Thank you," he said. "She was going to eat. I just made it easier." "You didn't have to. I was already awake." She didn't look up from her phone. "She's not difficult in the mornings. You should know that. She told me she likes mornings. She said you do not like mornings. She's 5, not a journalist. She's fairly observant." He looked at the back of Anastasia's head and the particular way she held herself, very straight, even at the counter, even in the morning, and thought about what it cost a person like her to be domestic in someone else's kitchen, to hand a child cereal and call it nothing. He thought about it, and then he didn't, because he had a school drop-off in 18 minutes. The thing nobody told you about being a single parent, Ethan thought, was that it wasn't the big dramatic nights that wore you down. It was the math, the daily, relentless math of money and time and energy, and the space where one of those things was always a little short. He had it better than some. The job was stable. The health insurance covered Maya. His mother helped when she could. Mrs. Okafor was across the hall. He was not in crisis mode. He was in the mode just below crisis, where everything was fine in a way that required constant maintenance, like a car that ran but made a noise you were monitoring. The $400 a month from Anastasia quietly changed the math. Not dramatically, not in a way that fixed anything large, but the anxiety that had been sitting in the back of his throat every time he opened the banking app, that low-grade, always-present hum of, "Is this month okay?" got quieter. He didn't mention this to her. It felt like the kind of thing that if he named it, it would become about gratitude, and he already owed her more awkward gratitude situations than he was comfortable with. He paid off his credit card balance for the first time in 8 months. He bought Maya the winter boots she'd been needing. He paid the parking fine that had been sitting in his glove compartment since November, looking at him. These were not things he talked about. They were just things that happened. She had bad nights sometimes. He didn't know the specifics, he didn't ask, but he'd hear her through the wall, shifting in the bed, or occasionally moving in the chair, rolling from the bedroom to the kitchen and back. He'd hear the sound of the refrigerator opening, the quiet tap of water running. One night he was already up. He had insomnia sometimes, had had it since Rebecca, the kind where he wasn't particularly distressed. He just wasn't asleep. He was simply present in the dark with his own thoughts. And he went to the kitchen for water, and she was already there. She was at the table with her laptop open. She didn't close it when he came in. The screen showed a spreadsheet of some kind, dense with numbers. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't know you were up. You don't have to apologize for coming into your own kitchen." He got water, stood by the sink. "Can't sleep?" "I sleep in pieces," she said. "I always have. Even before." He understood that before was doing a lot of work in that sentence and didn't push at it. "What are you working on?" he asked, nodding at the laptop. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned the screen slightly, more visible to him without being an invitation to read closely. "A company," she said. "A small one. A logistics consultancy. Something I know how to do." She looked at the screen. "I've been building a business plan. It's probably unrealistic." "Why?" "Because I don't have capital. Because most of my industry contacts now work for people who have a vested interest in my not succeeding. Because," she stopped, "there are several reasons. But you're building the plan anyway. I like to have something to do at 3 in the morning. He looked at the spreadsheet. Even from where he stood, the structure of it was impressive. Columns and subcolumns, projection bands, and different colors. "You know how to do this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I built my first financial model when I was 23, she said. In Excel, which my father thought was beneath him. I ran the actual operations of Meridian for 4 years while my name was still off the masthead." She closed the laptop. "I know how to do this." "Then it's not unrealistic." Capital is not a small obstacle." "No," he agreed. "But it's a different kind of problem than not knowing what you're doing." She looked at him. "You're optimistic." "Not usually." He finished his water. I've been around enough construction projects to know the difference between a thing that's impossible and a thing that's just expensive." A pause. "Those can overlap." "Sometimes, not always." She looked at him for another moment, and then she opened the laptop again, and he took that as a sign the conversation was over, so he went back to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about the spreadsheet, about the particular kind of damage that wasn't physical, the damage of having something you built taken from you, the amputation of a whole self. He knew something about that, though not in the way she did. He knew it in the private way you knew things you never talked about in full to anyone. He thought about Rebecca, which he did every night whether he planned to or not. Not always with grief exactly. Sometimes just with the plain flatness of her absence, the outline of where she used to be. He thought about the drawing Maya had made, the figure in the middle with the dark hair and loops. He was asleep before he decided anything. Maya asked why Anastasia couldn't walk. Not to him. To Anastasia directly, on a Saturday afternoon, while Ethan was on a work call in the kitchen and the two of them were in the living room where Maya had been, theoretically, watching a movie, and had instead been interrogating their house guest. He heard it from the kitchen because Maya's volume control was, and had always been, approximate. "I told you already," Anastasia said. "I hurt my back." "But people hurt their backs and then they walk again," Maya said, with the specific logic of a child who had heard this discussed by adults. "My teacher hurt her back and she walked again." "Different kinds of hurt," Anastasia said. "How is yours different?" A pause. "Do you know what a spinal cord is?" "No." It's think of it like a cable in your back. It carries messages from your brain to your legs. When mine was hurt, some of those messages stopped getting through. "So your brain tries to talk to your legs?" "Yes. And they don't answer?" "Some of them answer, some of them don't." Maya thought about this with visible seriousness. "That must be really annoying," she said. "Yes," Anastasia said. "It is." "Did it hurt when it happened?" "Not right away," Later it did. Were you scared? Another pause, longer. Yes, very scared. I get scared sometimes, Maya said. When it thunders. Daddy lets me sleep in his bed. That helps, with thunder. Yeah. Maya was quiet for a moment, then, you can sleep in my bed sometime, if you get scared. Ethan's work call was asking him a question about a project timeline. He answered it. He kept his voice even. He looked at the ceiling for a second and then at his laptop screen, and he stayed on the call. Beat it. The worst day of that first month was a Friday. He got to work to find that a project he'd spent 11 weeks on had been reassigned without warning, given to a senior manager who'd been angling for it since the kickoff meeting, a man named Garrett, who had a particular talent for institutional politics and who smiled at Ethan in the hallway with a warmth that didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't the project itself that got to him. It was his manager's explanation. We felt the timeline needed a more experienced hand at this stage. He was 32 years old and had been at the firm for 6 years. More experienced. He drove home in traffic that added 45 minutes to a 40-minute commute, picked up Maya from aftercare, stopped at the grocery store with Maya asking to touch everything, and a list he hadn't fully planned, and a cart whose wheel dragged left. And by the time he got home and got Maya settled and the groceries put away, he had a headache that had settled behind his right eye like a slow burn. Anastasia was in the kitchen when he started on dinner. She looked at him once and didn't say anything, and he was grateful for that. He made pasta because it was fast and Maya would eat it. He burned the garlic because he turned away to help Maya with something and then forgot. He stood over the pan and looked at the burned garlic and the ruined base of the sauce, and something in him, some very tired, very quiet thing, just kind of buckled. He took the pan off the heat. He put his hands on the counter. He stood there for a minute, not moving. He heard Anastasia's chair behind him. He heard her go to the cabinet, the lower one, where he kept the canned goods now, since she'd reorganized. And he heard the sound of a can opener. "Sit down," she said. "I'm making dinner. You burned the garlic. Sit down. I can start over, so you can sit down and let me open this can of crushed tomatoes, which is what we're using instead." He turned around. She was at the counter with the can opener, efficient and unhurried. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She didn't look at him. "There's olive oil in the cabinet, and the pasta is already in the water, so sit down." He sat down. Maya climbed into his lap, which she sometimes did when she sensed something was off, her 5-year-old emotional radar uncannily precise. He put his arm around her and watched Anastasia at the counter, the way she moved between the stove and the cutting board, the way she adapted the reach and angle of everything without apparently thinking about it. "Smells better already," Maya said. "Your father burned the garlic," Anastasia said. "It takes a minute to fix." "Daddy burns stuff sometimes," Maya told her. "It's okay, though." "I know," Anastasia said. "Everyone does." It was a minor thing to say, a nothing thing, practically. But it landed in him somewhere soft, and he had to look at Maya's hair for a moment instead of at Anastasia, because he was tired and the headache was still there, and he was in no condition to examine anything complicated right now. The pasta was better than what he would have made. He didn't say so. She didn't ask. After Maya was in bed, he came back to the kitchen to clean up and found she'd already done it. He stood there in this clean kitchen and thought that he should probably say something about all of it. The garlic, the dinner, the dishes. But by the time he got to the living room, she had her headphones in and her laptop open, and the conversation, if there had been one, was clearly finished. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in a week, which was its own kind of complicated. So, 3 things happened at the end of the month that changed the quiet logic they'd been operating under. The first was that the shelter called to say the room with the accessible elevator was now available, with a move-in date of the following Monday. The second was that Maya, upon overhearing this, said nothing, went to her room, and came back with a drawing she'd made during the week, a new one, 4 figures this time, all with faces, all with colors, under a very large house and a very large sun, and put it on Anastasia's bedside table without explanation. The third was that Ethan, alone in the kitchen at 10:30 on a Thursday night, looked at the Monday date on the shelter intake form that Anastasia had set on the counter, and sat there for a long time without quite knowing what he was feeling, only knowing he was feeling something. He didn't say anything about it that night. He went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the apartment, the small noises of it, the settling of the old radiator, the street outside, The quiet that was different now than it had been a month ago. Different in a way he didn't have a word for yet. Monday was 4 days away. He didn't know what he was going to do about that. He didn't bring it up on Friday. He told himself that was because Maya was home from school with a stomachache that turned out to be anxiety about a presentation she had to give on Monday. Her first one, apparently, a 2-minute talk about her favorite animal. And she had chosen the axolotl, which Ethan privately thought was an excellent choice and a terrible word to make a 5-year-old pronounce in front of her class. They spent Friday evening practicing. Anastasia, from the living room, offered the correct pronunciation 3 times without being asked, and Maya repeated it with the gravity of someone preparing for a courtroom. Saturday, he had a half day of remote work and then took Maya to the park because the temperature had climbed into the low 40s, which in February in Chicago felt almost optimistic. He thought about the shelter intake form on the counter the whole time he was pushing Maya on the swings. Sunday he woke up and the form was still there, and Monday was 1 day away, and he stood in the kitchen in his socks and looked at it and thought, say something. Anastasia came out of the bedroom at 7:30, which was her usual time, already dressed, already arranged. She looked at him. He looked at her. I haven't packed, she said. I know. I should pack today. Probably. She went to the coffee maker. He watched her go through the motions, the filter, the grounds, the precise amount of water, the same every time. She had a system for the coffee maker the same way she had a system for everything. It had stopped being annoying sometime in the second week, and he couldn't pinpoint exactly when. The intake is at 10 tomorrow, she said. I know. I can drive you. You don't? I know I don't have to. He sat down at the table. Anastasia. She turned. He had thought about how to say it and had not come up with a good way, so he just said it the plain way. Maya is going to have a hard time when you go. She looked at him for a moment. I know. She's gotten used to you. I know that too. She turned back to the coffee. She'll adjust. Children do. Yeah. He pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve. But I wanted you to know. She's going to miss you. Anastasia was quiet. She put the drawing on your table, he said. I saw it. The one with 4 people. I saw it, Ethan. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was the opposite of sharp. It was very level, the way a voice gets when the person talking is managing something underneath it carefully. He stopped pulling the thread. Okay, he said. I just wanted to say it. She poured her coffee. She came to the table and sat across from him, which she didn't always do. Sometimes she took her coffee back to the bedroom for the first hour, which he'd come to understand was her way of having a morning before the morning started. Today she sat across from him. They drank their coffee. I'll take the drawing with me, she said. If that's all right. She'd want you to have it. Another silence, different from the usual kind. This one had weight to it. I don't want to go to the shelter, she said. It came out flat, without decoration, the way she said hard things. I want to be clear about that. It's not about being comfortable here, or about Maya. I don't want to go because it's the right next step, and I've been taking right next steps for 11 months, and every single one of them has led somewhere smaller than the one before. He listened. My apartment in New York had 3 floors, she said. I had a car. I had a team. She stopped. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I had a life that made sense to me. And now the right next step is a shelter room on the 2nd floor of a building with an unreliable elevator. She looked at her coffee. I understand it's temporary. I understand the logic of it. I just wanted to say that I don't want to go, so you know I'm not leaving because I want to. He didn't fill the silence. That's all, she said. He looked at her across the table. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window, the winter light, pale and precise, and it caught the side of her face in a way that showed how tired she was, how much she was holding in that composed expression. Then don't go, he said. She looked up. Not permanently, he said. I'm not saying that. But don't go tomorrow. Give it another few weeks. The shelter will have other openings. The business plan will be further along. Something will be different. He paused. Just don't go to a place you don't want to go because the calendar says Monday. She studied him with that measuring look, but it was different now than it had been in the first week. Less suspicious, more like she was trying to figure out what the catch was and couldn't find one. You said Maya was the reason, she said carefully. Maya's part of it. What's the rest? He thought about it honestly because she was someone who would notice if he wasn't honest. I think you're going to build something real, he said. That business plan. I think it's going to work. And I think if you go into a shelter room on a broken elevator right now, something is going to get harder to hold on to. I can't explain it better than that. She was quiet for a long time. 3 more weeks, she said. Or longer. Whatever you need. 3 weeks. I'll have a clearer picture of the funding situation in 3 weeks. Okay. She picked up her coffee. I'll pay for the full month. You don't have... I'll pay for the full month, she said again, and he recognized the tone, so he let it go and met. The call came on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks later, and it wasn't from the shelter. Ethan was in the middle of a work meeting, video call, his laptop propped on the kitchen counter because the light was better there, when he heard Anastasia's voice go very quiet in the bedroom and then go silent. And then after a moment, he heard the bedroom door open and close again with a firmness that was unlike her usual precision. He finished the meeting. He went to the hallway. Anastasia, nothing. Anastasia, I'm going to knock. Don't. Her voice was steady. Give me a few minutes. He gave her 20. When she came out, her face was the most composed he had ever seen it, which he'd come to understand was a bad sign. The more composed she looked, the more that composure was load-bearing. My uncle filed a motion, she said, in the Swiss courts. Permanent incapacity declaration. If it goes through, it affects my ability to enter into contracts. It affects the business registration. It affects... She stopped. She was looking at a fixed point somewhere past him. It's designed to make it impossible for me to operate independently, legally, in any significant capacity. He let that land. Can he do that? His lawyers believe so. My lawyer, the one I can still afford, who is very good but operating with limited resources, says we can fight it, but it will take time, and the preliminary injunction could be in place within 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Yes. He leaned against the wall. Okay. What does he want? Your uncle. She looked at him then. The remaining assets. There's a property portfolio that was in my name personally, not the company's. 4 buildings, mostly in Moscow and 1 in Riga. He can't touch them directly, but if I'm declared legally incapacitated, he controls them through the estate structure. Her voice was controlled and informational, and he could see exactly what it cost her to keep it that way. He was always very patient, she said. I didn't understand how patient until it was too late. He thought about the spreadsheet at 3 a.m, the color-coded columns, the projection bands. He thought about the way she'd said, I built my first financial model at 23. Not boastful, just factual, the way a carpenter might say they learned to read a level. Your lawyer, he said. What does she need? Time and money. Mostly time. The motion won't be heard for 60 days. If we can file a counter-filing with sufficient documentation of my capacity, financial records, evidence of current business activity, testimony from individuals who can attest to my functional competence, she stopped. I'm working on it. I've been building the documentation for weeks, actually. I just didn't know the timeline was this short. What kind of documentation? The business plan, formalized. A registered business entity, ideally already operational. Any contracts, any clients, any evidence of active professional function. She looked at her hands. The problem is the registration. To register a business in Illinois under my name, I need a permanent address. The shelter address won't work, but I've already checked. Transitional housing addresses are flagged in the state system for certain registration types. I need a residential address. A real one. Stable. He was quiet. I'm not asking you, she said immediately. I want to be clear about that. I'm explaining the problem. I'm not asking you to... You can use this address, he said. Ethan, for the registration, you can use this address. She looked at him. That's not a small thing. That puts your name adjacent to any legal proceedings. If my uncle's lawyers decide to challenge the address, then they challenge it. He pushed off the wall. What else does the registration need? She studied him for a long moment. You don't have to do this. I know I don't. He looked at her steadily. What else does it need? Something moved across her face. Not the controlled composure, but the thing underneath it, the real thing, that she usually kept very well hidden. It was there for about 2 seconds, and then it was gone. A principal officer listed, she said. I'd be the CEO, but for the IL registration, a U.S. resident needs to be listed as a registered agent. Put me down. You understand what that means legally? More or less. I'm not a lawyer. Neither am I, technically, though I've read enough contracts to pass the bar on a good day. She said it without humor and then seemed to realize it had come out like a joke and did something with her mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. I'll have my lawyer review it. There's language we can use to limit your exposure. Fine. She looked at him. Why are you doing this? He'd expected the question. She asked it every time he did something she hadn't accounted for. He thought she asked it not because she suspected his motives, but because she genuinely needed to understand the logic, because she was a person who had been operated on in bad faith by people who were supposed to be on her side, and so she'd built a very careful habit of asking. Because your uncle sounds like a specific kind of person, he said, and I have a specific kind of problem with that kind of person. She waited. The kind who operates through paperwork, he said, who does something completely destructive and keeps their hands clean because it's technically legal. He thought about Garrett and his project and the institutional smile in the hallway. I don't like that kind of person. She was quiet. Then, he's not the only one. There are board members who went along with it, people I worked with for years. I know. He went to the coffee maker. I figured. The social services visit happened on a Thursday, 14 days after the legal call, and it was entirely unexpected. He came home from picking up Maya at aftercare to find a car he didn't recognize parked in front of the building and a woman in the lobby, 40-something, carrying a clipboard and the particular air of someone who was professionally neutral about everything she saw, which was its own kind of communication. She introduced herself as Karen Elwood from the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. She showed her ID. She said there had been an anonymous referral, and she was conducting a routine inquiry into the living situation of one Maya Miller, age 5. He stood there with Maya's backpack in his hand, and Maya pressed against his leg, looking at the woman with the wary attention of a child who has learned to read adult tension, and he thought, anonymous referral. What kind of referral? He said. The nature of the referral is confidential, Miss Elwood said, not unkindly. It's routine to investigate. Most inquiries are closed after a single visit. What are you investigating for? I need to see the living environment and speak with any adults present in the home. She looked at him with neutral, practiced eyes. Is there anyone else in the residence? A house guest, he said, temporarily. She wrote something on her clipboard. He felt the specific cold of someone who has not done anything wrong and is about to have to prove it. He took Maya upstairs. He knocked on the bedroom door. Anastasia opened it and looked at his face and then looked at the woman behind him, and her own face did a rapid and invisible recalibration. This is Ms. Elwood, he said, from DCFS. Anastasia looked at Ms. Elwood. I see, she said. Ms. Stams. Elwood looked at Anastasia and the wheelchair in the room behind her with the same neutral professionalism. Miss Volkova. Anastasia Volkova. And your relationship to Mr. Miller? A beat. A very small, almost invisible beat. House guest, Anastasia said. I've been staying here temporarily. Ms. Elwood wrote something. She asked to see the apartment. She looked at Maya's room, at the kitchen, at the bathroom, at the living room. She checked the refrigerator and the medicine cabinet and the smoke detectors. She asked Maya if she liked living here. Maya said yes, and also that Anastasia had taught her how to say axolotl correctly, and Ms. Elwood said that was very nice. She asked Ethan about his income and his work situation. He answered everything. He kept his voice level. She asked how long Anastasia had been staying. About 6 weeks, he said. And the plan is for her to move to permanent housing? She's working on it. Ms. Elwood looked around the apartment one more time. She looked at Maya, who was sitting on the couch drawing something and occasionally glancing up. She looked at Anastasia, who was near the kitchen doorway. She'd positioned herself there when the tour started, Ethan noticed, in a place where she was visible but not in anyone's path. I'll need to follow up in 2 weeks, Ms. Elwood said. If the living situation has been clarified by then, the inquiry will likely close. Clarified how? He asked. Ideally, a more defined arrangement, formal documentation of occupancy, something that establishes the nature of the household. She clicked her pen. Unrelated adults of different genders sharing a residence isn't an issue in itself. It's the ambiguity that's a flag in these cases. The referral mentioned concerns about household stability. After she left, the apartment was very quiet. Maya was still drawing. She didn't seem particularly disturbed by any of it, which was either a good sign or a sign that at 5 years old she simply didn't have enough context to be disturbed. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room. Household stability, he said, to no one in particular. Anastasia was behind him. He heard her come closer. The referral was anonymous, she said. Yes. People who file anonymous referrals to child services don't usually do it out of genuine concern. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression that was still composed but had something in it now. Attention. Something pressed right up against the surface. My uncle has a lawyer here, she said, in Chicago. He hired a U.S. firm 2 months ago. I found out through my own lawyer last week. He stared at her. You think? I think it's possible, she said. I think it's the kind of thing Victor would do. File a referral, create a record of instability, use it in the incapacity proceedings to argue that I'm in an unsuitable environment and unable to make sound decisions. She paused. I think he also might just be trying to make you afraid enough to ask me to leave. The anger came up quietly, the way it always did for him. Not hot, just a slow, dense thing that settled in his chest. Then we don't let him, he said. It's not that simple. I know it's not simple. He looked at her. What did Ms. Elwood say? Documentation of occupancy, formal arrangement, something that establishes the nature of the household. He said the last part with the same official flatness she'd used, and Anastasia's expression shifted slightly. There's one thing that would clear every piece of that up at once, he said. She looked at him. I know how that sounds, he said. It sounds like you're suggesting we get married. I'm suggesting it as a legal arrangement, a formality. It would make you a resident, not a house guest. It would make the address legitimate for the business registration. It would give you standing in the custody question, not as a parent, but as a household member with legal status, which changes the inquiry entirely. He paused. And it would make it a lot harder for your uncle to argue that you're living in an unstable situation when you're a married woman with a home address and a registered business. She was very still. I know it's not what either of us... He started. I know what it is, she said. Her voice was flat and careful. You don't have to explain what it is. Okay? Silence. This would affect you, she said. Legally, financially. If there's any blowback from the Swiss proceedings, you'd have your lawyer structure it to minimize that. Yes, but Anastasia. He met her eyes. Do you have a better option right now? In the next 2 weeks before Miss Elwood comes back? She held his gaze. She was doing that calculation thing, working through it in real time, and he could almost see the columns shifting. No, she said finally. I don't. Then we should talk about it. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. The apartment was quiet around them, Maya's crayon making its small sound on paper, the radiator ticking. This is insane, she said. I know. We've known each other for 6 weeks. 7 weeks. She looked at her hands. I don't even know what kind of music you like. I don't really listen to music. She looked at him. That's a problem. I listen to podcasts. What kind? History, true crime sometimes, construction industry news. She stared at him. Construction industry news. It's relevant to my job. It's the least romantic thing I've ever heard a person say. This isn't a romantic situation. No, she said. It really isn't. She was quiet for a moment, then, I like jazz. Old jazz. Miles Davis, if that's going to be an issue. It's not going to be an issue. And I work at strange hours. I know. And I'm not going to be a wife, Ethan. I don't mean that the way it sounds. I mean, I'm not going to cook and clean, and you already cook sometimes, and you cleaned the kitchen on Friday. That was different. I know. He held up a hand. I'm not asking for anything like that. It's a legal arrangement. We'd live the way we already live. Nothing changes except the paperwork. She looked at the floor, at her hands, at the bedroom door behind which 4 weeks of business plans, spreadsheets, and legal correspondence lived on a laptop. Maya, she said. He waited. How do we explain it to Maya? He thought about it. Honestly, she's 5. If we tell her it means Anastasia is going to stay, she's going to be fine with it. Children aren't furniture, she said. You can't just move them around and assume they'll adapt. I know that. She's going to form attachments. She already has. I know. And if in 6 months the legal situation resolves and I'm able to establish independent housing, what do we tell her then? The truth. That it was a complicated situation that we handled together and that it changed. That adults sometimes make decisions that are practical and that doesn't mean the people involved don't matter. He paused. She's going to deal with complicated truths her whole life. Learning that early isn't the worst thing. Anastasia looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said. At the bus stop. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone simpler, maybe? She said it without unkindness. Someone whose life was more straightforward. Nobody's life is straightforward. No, she said. I'm learning that. They were quiet. Maya had moved from the couch to the floor, lying on her stomach with her drawing spread out in front of her, deeply unconcerned with anything except whatever she was creating. We'd need to go to the courthouse, Anastasia said. It can be done quickly. Civil ceremony, no waiting period in Illinois for the license. I know, I looked it up. She turned to look at him. When did you look it up? After Miss Elwood's visit, before I said anything. So you were already thinking about it. I was thinking about options, he said. This was one of them. What were the others? There weren't really others. She held his gaze. Then she did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. That small, reluctant thing at the edge of her mouth that he'd seen a handful of times and that always felt like something earned rather than given. I want it in writing, she said. The terms. Both of us. Documented. The nature of the arrangement, the timeline for review. What happens if circumstances change? Okay. I'll have my lawyer draft it. Fine. And you should have someone look at it too. A lawyer. Not just read it yourself. Anastasia, I'm not going to say... Please. She looked at him directly. I need you to protect yourself in this. I need that. Not for my sake. Because if something goes wrong on my end and you've left yourself exposed, I'll spend the rest of whatever this is feeling responsible for it, and I can't carry that. He looked at her. She meant it. She was sitting across from him in a rearranged apartment in a wheelchair she hadn't chosen, asking him to take care of himself because she already had more things weighing on her than she'd let most people see. Okay, he said. I'll find a lawyer. Good. Another silence. Do you need to think about it more? He asked. Before you decide? She considered. No, I've thought about it. She looked at him steadily. Yes. Okay. Let's do it. He nodded. He wasn't sure what he felt. Something complicated and quiet and not quite named. Can I tell Mrs. Okafor? Anastasia asked. He blinked. You want to tell Mrs. Okafor? She's going to find out. I'd rather she hear it from us. She paused. She'll also probably bake something, which I think would be good for everyone. He looked at her. You want Mrs. Okafor to bake something? I want there to be something that makes this feel less like a legal transaction, she said, even if only for an hour. She looked at the window. We don't have to call it a celebration. We can just call it telling Mrs. Okafor. He thought about Mrs. Okafor, who would not call it anything except exactly what she thought it was, and who would have opinions, and who would probably make her jollof rice along with the baking, and who would look at both of them with those sharp, retired nurse eyes and take a reading of the room. She's going to be very pleased with herself, he said. I know. Anastasia looked back at him. She'll probably say she saw it coming. She did see it coming. She said something to me in the second week. What did she say? He looked at the ceiling. She said you were good at hiding things, but not as good as you thought. Anastasia was quiet. That's fair, she said at last. From the floor, Maya looked up from her drawing. She'd been listening, probably, at least to the tone of things, in the way she always listened. Are you guys going to keep talking, or can I show you what I drew? She asked. They both looked at her. Show us, Ethan said. She held up the paper. It was the apartment again. She'd been drawing the apartment for weeks in variations, but this time she'd added something new. There were no separate figures. There was a table, a big one, and 3 chairs, and 3 people around it, and she'd drawn them so close their outlines were touching. That's us, Maya said, pointing at each figure in turn. That's you. That's Anastasia. That's me. I see that, Ethan said. Our hands are touching, Maya said, because we're a family. Neither of them said anything to that. Maya looked at them both, checking their faces with that radar of hers, and seemed satisfied with whatever she found, and went back to drawing. The apartment settled into its quiet sounds around them, and neither Ethan nor Anastasia spoke for a long moment, and it was the least uncomfortable silence they'd sat in together since the first night, which meant it was something else now, something without a name yet, sitting between them on the kitchen table, like a thing they'd both agreed to pick up and carry, without quite deciding when they'd made that choice. Mrs. Okafor did not bake something. She made jollof rice, a pot of it, enough for 12 people, and she brought it across the hall on a Saturday afternoon with a look on her face that she was making no effort to moderate. She set the pot on the stove, turned the burner to low, and then stood in the kitchen with her arms folded and looked at Ethan, and then at Anastasia, and then back at Ethan. Well, she said. It's a legal arrangement, Ethan said. I heard you the first time. We just wanted you to know before what? Before I found out from Maya, who would have told me within 48 hours regardless. Mrs. Okafor unfolded her arms and picked up a spoon, stirring the rice with the authority of someone who had decided the cooking needed attending, and the conversation could proceed without her full attention. I'm not going to tell you it's foolish. I'm not going to tell you it's wise. I'm 71 years old and I've watched people make every kind of decision there is, and the only thing I know for certain is that you can't always see what a decision is until you're living inside it. That's unusually philosophical for a Saturday, Ethan said. I'm allowed. She tasted the rice. It's good. Sit down. They sat. Maya appeared from her room and attached herself immediately to the smell of the jollof rice, climbing onto her chair and looking at the pot with focused desire. Mrs. Okafor, Maya said, are you coming to the wedding? Maya, Ethan said. What? We talked about this. It is a wedding, Mrs. Okafor said firmly. Don't tell the child it isn't a wedding. It's a courthouse appointment, which is a wedding. Mrs. Okafor ladled rice into a bowl for Maya. I'll wear my blue dress, the one I wore to my nephew's graduation. Anastasia was quiet through all of this. He glanced at her. She was watching Mrs. Okafor with an expression he'd started to be able to read, a particular attentiveness she had around people she was deciding whether to trust. He'd seen it with Maya, in the beginning. He'd seen it with Mrs. Okafor once before, briefly, in the hallway. You can come, Anastasia said. If you want to. Mrs. Okafor turned. Of course I'm coming. She said it as though it had never been in question. Then she sat down across from Anastasia and looked at her directly. You're going to be all right, you know. Anastasia held her gaze. You don't know that? No, Mrs. Okafor agreed. But I've been watching people for a long time, and I know what it looks like when someone is going to be all right, even when they can't see it themselves. She pushed a bowl of rice across the table. Eat. The table was small enough that the four of them sitting around it required some rearrangement of chairs, and Ethan's knee was close enough to Anastasia's wheelchair wheel that he could feel the slight movement when she shifted, and the rice was good, and Mrs. Okafor talked about her nephew's graduation for 20 minutes, and it was ordinary, was the thing. It was just an ordinary Saturday afternoon with food and people, and Ethan sat in the middle of it and understood quietly that he'd been a long time without ordinary Saturday afternoons, and that the absence of something could go numb if you weren't careful. The courthouse was a gray building on West Washington that looked exactly like what it was, a place where the city administered its formal business without much interest in how you felt about it. They went on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Okafor came in her blue dress. Maya wore the purple leggings that weren't allowed at school because Ethan had decided this was not a school situation and the rules didn't apply. Anastasia wore a dark green blouse and the good coat, the one she'd been wearing the night at the bus stop. Ethan wore the suit he owned, which he'd bought for a job interview 4 years ago and which still fit but felt like someone else's armor. The clerk who processed their paperwork was a man in his 50s who had clearly done this 10,000 times and was professionally cheerful about it. He asked for the license, confirmed the details, walked them through the brief civil ceremony with the briskness of someone who had a full waiting room. Do you, Ethan James Miller, take Anastasia Irina Volkova as your lawfully wedded— I do, Ethan said. And do you, Anastasia Irina Volkova, take Ethan James Miller— I do, Anastasia said. The clerk had them sign. He countersigned. He stamped 2 copies and handed them each one, and he said congratulations with the warmth of a man who meant it, and was also thinking about the next appointment. And that was it. Outside on the courthouse steps, Mrs. Okafor hugged Ethan longer than necessary, and then bent down and held Anastasia's face in both her hands for a moment, and said something very quietly in Yoruba that Ethan didn't understand and that Anastasia didn't understand either, but that made Anastasia close her eyes briefly in a way that looked like receiving something. Maya demanded to go to the diner on the corner, which they did, and she had pancakes with strawberries and explained to their server that they'd just gotten married, and the server said how wonderful, and brought them all a small plate of complimentary muffins, and Maya ate part of one and declared that marriage was great. Ethan looked at Anastasia across the table. She looked back. Neither of them said anything, but something in the look acknowledged the thing they both knew, which was that they had just done something real and documented and permanent until it wasn't, and that the gap between those 2 facts was going to have to be managed carefully. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. The diner was warm and loud and smelled like butter. Masan. The months that followed were not simple, but they had a shape, which was more than the winter had offered. Anastasia's lawyer filed the countermotion in the Swiss proceedings 5 weeks after the courthouse. It included the Illinois business registration, Volkova Consulting, LLC, a logistics advisory firm, and the residential address, and a 40-page documentation of professional competence that Anastasia had assembled over 2 months of late nights. Her marriage certificate was attached as Exhibit C, which was not something Ethan had expected to see his name on, but there it was. Exhibit C of a Swiss legal filing, Miller, Ethan J., listed as spouse. He read the filing once, at midnight, after Anastasia had gone to bed. He closed his laptop and sat with it. Victor's lawyers didn't respond immediately, which Anastasia said was a bad sign, and then corrected herself and said, it was actually a neutral sign that she was interpreting badly because she was anxious, and he appreciated the self-correction. The DCFS inquiry closed 3 weeks after the courthouse. Miss Elwood's follow-up visit was brief. She looked at the marriage certificate, looked at the apartment, spoke to Maya for 10 minutes, watched Maya show her a drawing of the family that now included a figure in a wheelchair with dark loops of crayon hair, and wrote her notes and left. The formal closure letter came by mail 11 days later. Ethan put it in the filing box under the bed and didn't look at it again. What happened instead over the following months was smaller and harder to document and more real than any of the paperwork. Anastasia started taking Maya to school on the days Ethan had early meetings. This happened the first time out of necessity. He had a 7:30 site call, and Maya's drop-off was 8:15 and the times didn't fit. And he'd arranged for Mrs. Okafor as backup, but Mrs. Okafor had a doctor's appointment, and Anastasia said, without particular fanfare, that she could take her. He'd walk through the logistics with her, the route, the crossing guard, the check-in process at the front office, and she'd listened with the same attention she gave everything and said she understood. He was in his work call when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that turned out to be the front office assistant at Maya's school, just confirming Maya Miller was dropped off at 8:12. Have a great day. He looked at his phone under the meeting table. Then he looked at it again. The second time it happened, he didn't give her a walkthrough. She already knew the route. She got her first client in April. A small company, a regional freight brokerage that had been having structural problems with their routing system for 2 years and had tried 2 different consulting firms without resolution. She'd found them through a former colleague who was willing to make a referral without crossing the people at Meridian, which was a narrow path she'd had to find carefully. The contract was modest. 8 weeks, deliverables-based, payment on completion. She told him at dinner, just said it flatly, between passing Maya the butter and asking if there was more water. I signed a contract today. He put his fork down. Yeah? A freight brokerage in Indiana. It's not large. The fee covers 3 months of business expenses and my share of the rent. That's good. That's really good. It's a start. She said it carefully, like she didn't want to weigh the words too much in either direction. The deliverable is a full routing analysis and restructuring recommendation. 6 weeks of work, realistically. I've done it a dozen times. So you know you can do it. Yes. Maya looked up from her plate. Did you get a job? A client, Anastasia said. A company that's paying me to help them with a problem. Like a helper? Like a consultant. Maya considered. What's a consultant? Someone who knows how to fix a specific kind of problem and charges money for it. Oh, Maya thought about this. Like a plumber? Anastasia looked at her. Somewhat like a plumber, yes. Cool. Maya went back to her food. Anastasia looked at Ethan. He was smiling, which he didn't try to hide. Don't say it, she said. I didn't say anything. You were going to. I was going to say congratulations. You were going to say something more than that. He picked up his fork. You're right. I was also going to say that Maya's not wrong. Plumber is a solid analogy. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I find that deeply insulting. You shouldn't. Plumbers are essential. I have a master's degree in international business from Essential, he said. She picked up her glass. She was not smiling, but she was also definitely not smiling, which was a distinction he'd gotten good at reading. Thank you, she said, for the business address and the registration. You've thanked me. I'm thanking you again. You don't have to keep. I know I don't have to. She put her glass down. I want to. Let me. He let her. The hard conversations happened in increments, which was the only way either of them could apparently manage them. The first one came on a Friday night in May when Maya was asleep and they'd both ended up in the kitchen at the same time, him getting water, her on her laptop, and she said without looking up, I've been thinking about the arrangement. He sat down. Okay. The original agreement was a review at 6 months. That's in 2 months. I know. She closed the laptop. This was her signal that she was giving a conversation her full attention, and he'd learned to treat it with the corresponding seriousness. The Swiss proceedings are still unresolved, she said. Victor's lawyers have filed 2 counter-responses to our filing. My lawyer says we're in a strong position, but it could take another year. She looked at the table. If we dissolve the arrangement in 2 months, it weakens my position in the case. The marriage certificate is part of the evidence of my capacity and stability. I know. I'm not asking you to stay in it indefinitely. I want to be clear about that. I'm asking if you'd consider extending the review period, another 6 months. He looked at her. She was looking at the table with an expression that was very carefully arranged, but that he could read now, the way you could read a place you'd spent enough time in. What about what you want? He said. She looked up. Not legally, not strategically. What do you want? She was quiet for a moment. That's not the relevant question right now. I think it is. Ethan, I'm not asking for a declaration, he said. I'm not trying to make this into something complicated. I'm asking because I want to know what you actually want. Separate from what's strategically optimal. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. The street outside had gone quiet too. The particular quiet of late Friday that felt different from other nights. I don't know, she said finally. I don't know what I want. I know what I know, which is that this, she gestured, a small motion that seemed to encompass the kitchen and the apartment and possibly everything past it. This works, in some way that I didn't expect, and I don't know what to do with that. He held her gaze. Neither do I. So we're both confused. I think we're both choosing not to call it something we're not sure of. Yes, she looked at the table, which is probably wise. Probably. So 6 more months, she said, and we reevaluate. 6 more months, he agreed. She opened her laptop again. He drank his water. The kitchen settled back around them. After a minute, she said, You know I make more noise at night than I used to, in the wheelchair, when I'm moving around. I know. I'm a light sleeper. Does it bother you? No? I thought it might. It doesn't. He got up. It's fine. I know you're there. It's fine. She looked at him briefly, that look. The real one, not the composed surface one, and then away. Okay, she said. He went to bed. Yeah, the thing that broke through the surface between them wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a crisis or a confession or one of those scenes where something finally snaps and everything becomes clear. It was a Thursday afternoon in June, ordinary and warm, the kind of afternoon Chicago offered like an apology for February. He'd come home early because the site visit got canceled, and when he came through the door, he heard voices, Anastasia's and Maya's, and they were in the living room. He set his bag down quietly, not sure why quietly, and looked around the corner. Anastasia was at the window with her laptop, and Maya was beside her in a chair she'd dragged over, and Anastasia was showing her something on the screen. It looked like a map, a routing map, probably something from her work, with colored lines and nodes, and Maya was asking questions with the particular focus she applied to things she'd decided were genuinely interesting. What's that line? That's a route, from one city to another. Why is it red? Because it's slow. It's taking longer than it should. Why? Because the people who designed it didn't think about what happened when traffic backed up here. She pointed at a node. When this point gets blocked, everything behind it slows down. Like when the hallway is blocked and you can't get through? Anastasia paused. Exactly like that. So you have to find a different way. Exactly. That's what I'm doing. Finding the different way. Maya looked at the screen for a moment. Then she said, Is that what happened to you when you got hurt, like a blocked route? Ethan went still in the doorway. Anastasia was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. In a way. The route I had planned got blocked. But you found a different way. I'm still finding it. That's okay, though. Maya was looking at the screen still. Daddy says the finding part is the important part, not already knowing. Your father said that? When I couldn't find my shoe, but I think it's the same. Anastasia looked at Maya for a moment, and Ethan, from the doorway, saw her face in the afternoon light. The real face, the one underneath the composure, the one that was tired and precise and trying, and something in it moved, not broke, moved, like something that had been held in one position for a very long time shifted a single degree. Yes, Anastasia said, I think it's the same. He stepped back from the doorway and went to the kitchen and started on dinner, and he didn't say anything about what he'd heard. But when Anastasia came to the kitchen later and asked if he needed help, and he said yes, she moved beside him at the counter with the easy efficiency that had stopped being unfamiliar months ago, and they worked together in the kitchen without speaking much. And it was the kind of quiet that had stopped being an absence and had become something else, a presence, a particular texture of two people who had gotten used to sharing the same space and had stopped needing to fill it. His mother visited in July. She drove up from Peoria on a Saturday, which she hadn't done in over a year, and Ethan understood from the fact of the visit that she needed to see for herself. He couldn't blame her. He'd told her things on the phone that he suspected didn't make complete sense from the outside. His mother's name was Diane, and she was 63 years old and had the particular combination of warmth and precision that Ethan had spent most of his life trying and failing to replicate. She came in and hugged him for a long time, and then held him at arm's length and looked at his face. You look better, she said. I'm fine. You look better than fine. She released him. You look like you're sleeping. Mostly. Maya appeared from the bedroom and launched herself at her grandmother with the force of someone who had been waiting for this arrival and had opinions about the delay. Diane caught her and held her up and said, Look at you, look how big. And Maya said, I know, with the confidence of someone who had been monitoring her own growth closely. Anastasia came from the kitchen. She'd been making tea. She'd made tea when Ethan texted to say his mother was 20 minutes away, without being asked, and he'd noted this and not mentioned it. Diane looked at Anastasia. Anastasia looked at Diane. There was a moment that Ethan couldn't fully interpret, a moment of two women measuring each other with the particular attention of people who had both, in different ways, organized themselves around keeping things together. Mrs. Miller, Anastasia said. Diane, his mother said. Call me Diane. And she crossed the room and took Anastasia's hand in both of hers and held it the way she held things she was deciding the worth of. He told me about the bus stop, she said. He told me he told you. He didn't tell me everything. He never does. She released Anastasia's hand and looked around the apartment with the eyes of someone reading it. But I can see some of the things he left out. Mom, Ethan said, I'm just talking. She sat down at the kitchen table, entirely at home, because she was Diane Miller, and she was at home wherever she sat. Sit down, everyone. Let's eat. Maya, show me the new drawings. Maya brought a stack that was approximately 4 inches high. They ate lunch, Anastasia's tea, Ethan's sandwiches, his mother's cookies that she'd brought from Peoria. And his mother listened to Maya's commentary on each drawing with full attention, and asked Anastasia about her work with the same direct curiosity she'd applied to everything in Ethan's life since he was a child. And Anastasia answered her, which he noticed. She didn't give the abbreviated version she gave most people. She talked about the freight brokerage in real terms, about the routing analysis, about the second client she'd picked up 2 weeks ago, a small import firm with distribution problems. You built all of this in 6 months? His mother said. 4 months, properly. The first 2 were set up. From nothing? From a laptop and a legal address. Anastasia looked at her hands. And some help. His mother looked at Ethan. He looked at the table. I'm glad he stopped, his mother said. At the bus stop. He almost didn't. You know that. Anastasia looked at him. I didn't know that. He's like his father, Diane said. Tries to think his way out of the right thing to do before he just does it. I'm in the room, Ethan said. I know. His mother picked up her cookie. I'm talking to your wife. The word landed, not badly, just with weight. He looked at Anastasia, and she was looking at his mother with an expression that was close, he thought, to the expression she'd had watching Maya's routing conversation. Something moved. Single degree. He's also like his father in the better ways, Diane said. I want you to know that. I'm beginning to see that, Anastasia said. The afternoon went on. His mother played with Maya on the floor, which she did with the complete unself-consciousness of someone who had never found it beneath her. Ethan washed the dishes. Anastasia came to dry them, which she sometimes did and sometimes didn't, and they stood at the sink together in the comfortable way they'd developed over months, passing things back and forth without having to think about it. Your mother is remarkable, Anastasia said quietly. She's a lot. She loves you in a way that doesn't make you smaller. She handed him a dry glass. That's rarer than it sounds. He looked at her sideways. Your mother? A pause. Different, she said. Not closed off, just short, like a corridor she wasn't ready to walk down in full. Okay, he said. She wasn't cruel, she was just... Anastasia dried the last bowl. She expected me to be excellent, and when I was excellent, she expected more. And when everything fell apart, she didn't know what to do with me, because I'd stopped being what she knew how to be proud of. He didn't fill the silence. She called last month, Anastasia said, for the first time since the hospital. What did she say? She heard I was working again. She said she was relieved. She set the bowl in the cabinet. She didn't ask how I was. She said she was relieved I was working, and I understood that was the same thing, for her. It's just not the same thing for me anymore. He looked at her. I used to be that too, she said. Someone whose answer to how are you was what they were accomplishing. She didn't say it with self-pity, just with the evenness of a person who had had a long time to look at a thing clearly. I'm less sure that's what I want to be now. What do you want to be? She looked at the window. I don't know yet. I'm still finding the different way. She glanced at him. Maya's phrase. She's wise for a 5-year-old. She's wise for anyone. Anastasia folded the dish towel. Your mother's going to think we have a real marriage. We have a legal marriage. She's going to think it's more than that. Maybe she's not wrong, he said. And then he heard what he'd said and didn't take it back because it was true enough that taking it back would have been dishonest. And he'd made a personal rule some time ago about not being dishonest when the truth was manageable. She looked at him. He looked back. That's a significant thing to say, she said. I know. We said 6 months. I know that too. And then we reevaluate. Yes. She looked at him for a long, careful moment. Okay, she said. Okay. And she went back to the living room where his mother was showing Maya how to fold a piece of paper into a crane, and Ethan stood at the kitchen counter and let the words settle. Okay. He'd learned in the time they'd been in the same apartment that she used that word carefully, that it didn't always mean agreement. Sometimes it meant I see you. Sometimes it meant I'm not ready to say the rest of it yet, but I'm not closing the door. He understood that. He'd been living in that same space for months. He went back to the living room. He sat on the floor beside his mother and helped Maya with the paper crane, and Anastasia sat near the window with afternoon light across the side of her face, and nobody said anything particularly significant. And the afternoon folded itself into evening the way good days do, without you quite noticing until the light changes. The Swiss ruling came on a Tuesday in September, which was an ordinary day in every other respect. Maya had school. Ethan had a site visit that ran long. Anastasia had a morning call with her third client, a mid-size import firm out of Detroit that had found her through the Indiana freight brokerage referral business, the kind that meant the first work had been good enough to travel. She was building something real. It was slow, and it was hers, and every piece of it had her fingerprints on it in a way that the Meridian years, for all their scale, hadn't quite. The email from her lawyer arrived at 11:43 a.m. She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and sat in the quiet of the bedroom for a few minutes, not moving, just breathing, the way she'd learned to do in the hospital when things arrived that were too large to process standing up. The motion had been denied. Victor's application for permanent incapacity declaration had been reviewed by the Swiss civil court and denied on the grounds of insufficient evidence. The counter-filing, the business registration, the client contracts, the professional correspondence, the residential documentation, the marriage certificate that was Exhibit C, had collectively constituted what the court described as a clear and consistent record of an individual operating with full legal and professional capacity. The property portfolio remained hers. The 4 buildings in Moscow and Riga, which she hadn't been able to touch for 11 months, which had sat in legal suspension while Victor maneuvered, were hers again, free and clear. She sat with this for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called her lawyer, who said congratulations in the careful way lawyers said it, reminding her there was a 30-day window for appeal, but that the ruling was strongly worded and an appeal was unlikely to succeed. Then she called the lawyer again because she'd forgotten to ask something and had to be reminded of the answer. Then she sat with the phone in her lap and thought about who to call next. She didn't call her mother. She thought about it. The number was in her phone. They'd spoken twice since July, both conversations careful and brief. But she sat with the impulse and let it pass, because what she wanted was not to report the victory to someone who would measure it, but to tell someone who would understand what the past 11 months had cost, and what it meant that it was over. She texted Ethan, "Call me when you have a minute." He called 40 seconds later. What happened? The ruling came. A beat. And? We won. Silence. Not a long one. Maybe 3 seconds. But she could hear something in it. A particular release, the sound of someone who had been holding a thing letting it go without ceremony. Anastasia. Yes. That's really good. I know. Are you okay? She thought about the question seriously the way she took most questions. I think so. I think I'm... She stopped. I don't know what I am. I'm waiting for it to feel like something. Give it time. My lawyer says Victor could still appeal. Will he? Probably not. It would cost more than it's worth at this point. The ruling was specific about the evidence. He'd need new grounds. She looked at the window. The September light was doing something clear and thin through the glass, that early fall quality that Chicago had some mornings before the cold came back. It's over, she said. I think it's actually over. Good, Ethan said. I'll be home by 4. We should do something. Take Maya somewhere. The good pizza place. She's going to order the same thing she always orders. Obviously, the point is the occasion. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you for Exhibit C. He was quiet for a second. You're thanking me for being on a document. I'm thanking you for what it meant that you were on it. She paused. There's a difference. I know, he said, and his voice had a quality she'd learned to recognize. The one that meant he was feeling something he wasn't going to name right now, but wasn't trying to hide either. I know there is. She held the phone after they hung up and looked at the room that had been hers for 8 months. At the laptop with its open spreadsheets, at the hard case in the corner that had traveled from New York to Chicago, through a night at a bus stop to this bedroom on Cortlandt Street. And she thought about the particular way life sometimes broke you open, not to destroy you, but to reroute you, to send you down a path so improbable you never would have chosen it. To a kitchen with mismatched furniture and a little girl who used logistics analogies about shoes, and a man who listened at 3 in the morning without filling the silence wrong. She thought about what came next. For the first time in 11 months, what comes next didn't feel like a threat. The 6-month review arrived at the end of September, and neither of them mentioned it for 4 days. This was, Ethan thought, itself a form of communication. He noticed it on a Sunday. The calendar on his phone had a reminder he'd set 6 months ago, a neutral one that just said review. And he looked at it, and then looked across the living room at Anastasia, who was on the couch with her laptop and a cup of tea, her reading glasses on. She'd started wearing reading glasses in August, an adjustment she'd made with characteristic lack of ceremony, simply announcing one evening that she'd ordered them online and they would be arriving Thursday. And he thought about saying something. He didn't. He put his phone in his pocket and made more coffee. She brought it up on Wednesday, which was apparently how long she'd needed. Maya was in bed. Ethan was reading on the couch. Anastasia came from the kitchen with her tea and stopped in the middle of the living room and said, "The review." "I know. We should talk about it." "I know, but..." He closed his book. "Sit down." She came and sat, near him, not across the room, which was not how she would have positioned herself 8 months ago. He noticed these things now without particularly deciding to. The distance between people in rooms. "The legal situation is resolved," she said. "The business is operational. I have 3 clients, a 4th in conversation, and projected revenue for next quarter that covers my expenses with margin." She said it factually, the way she reported most things. "The original reasons for the arrangement have been addressed." "Yes." "So technically we could proceed with dissolution." "Technically," he said. She looked at her tea. "I've been thinking about it." "I figured. I've been thinking that technically and actually are different things." She glanced at him. "Obviously." "Obviously. And that the question of what we do is separate from the question of what we should do, which is separate from the question of what we want to do." She paused. "Which is the hardest one?" He looked at her. She was still looking at her tea, but he knew she knew he was looking at her. "What do you want?" he said. She was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because of the legal situation, not because it's easier, because..." She stopped. "Because I wake up in the morning and the sound of you and Maya in the kitchen is the first thing I hear. And for a long time that was the only thing that felt like a normal morning, and I don't know when it stopped being that and started being something I wanted instead of just something I had, but it did." She looked at him. "That's what I want. I'm aware it's complicated." "It's not that complicated," he said. She looked at him. "Ethan, we got married at a courthouse to protect a legal filing, and you are the first person I have willingly lived with in my adult life, and I have a 5-year-old who has started calling me..." She stopped. He went still. "What?" She pressed her lips together briefly. "Last week, when I picked her up from school, she was telling her teacher who I was." She looked at the window. She said, "That's my mom, Anastasia." He didn't say anything. She corrected herself immediately. She said my dad's wife, Anastasia, and then she looked at me to see if I was upset. Anastasia's voice was very controlled. "I wasn't upset. I didn't know what I was." She set her tea down. "She's been watching us for 8 months and drawing conclusions that neither of us stated, and apparently she arrived somewhere." "She's 6, he said gently. Maya had turned 6 in August, a birthday involving a dinosaur cake that Mrs. Okafor had made and that had been structurally ambitious and ultimately delicious. "I know how old she is." "I mean, she didn't mean it as a... She's not trying to define what we are. She's just..." He paused. "She was telling her teacher who was there for her, that's all." Anastasia looked at him. Her eyes were very clear and very tired in the way they got when she'd been carrying something for days. "What are we?" she said, not dramatically. The way she asked questions she actually needed answered. He held her gaze. "I think we're people who started with a piece of paper and ended up somewhere the paper didn't account for." "That's not an answer." "I know." He shifted to face her more fully. "I'm in love with you." "That's an answer." He said it the way he said true things, without build-up, because he'd learned that with her, the decoration was worse than the plainness. "I don't know exactly when that happened. I know it wasn't at the bus stop, and I know it was before July, and I know it has nothing to do with the legal arrangement, and I know it makes everything more complicated, and I know that might not be what you..." "Ethan?" He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not the composure, not the thing underneath the composure. Something underneath that, something he thought maybe not many people had ever seen. "I know," she said. "I know. I'm trying to..." She exhaled. "I'm not good at this." "I know you're not. I was good at running a company. I was good at building systems and managing people and making things work at scale. I was not good at..." She gestured a small motion. "This, whatever this is. You're better at it than you think. Don't be generous." "I'm not being generous. You made her breakfast the morning I overslept. You stayed up until 2 in the morning helping me draft my response to the Garrett situation. You learned how Maya takes her cereal. The ratio is extremely specific, and it took me 4 years. 2 weeks, Anastasia said. 2 weeks. You learned it in 2 weeks. You didn't say anything, you just started making it right." He looked at her. "That's not nothing. That's not someone who isn't good at this." She was quiet. "I'm in love with you," he said again. "Not with the version of you that had the apartment in New York and the company car. With the version that argues about rent and wakes up at 3 in the morning with logistics spreadsheets and gets annoyed when I don't close the cabinet doors the right way." He paused. "Though I do close them now. I close them every time." "I noticed," she said. "Good." She looked at him for a long moment. The apartment was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, Maya was asleep, making the small sounds she made, the particular rhythm he'd memorized years ago, and that he knew Anastasia had memorized too, because she'd mentioned once, casually, that she could tell from the silence when Maya had shifted from light sleep to deep. And that was not the kind of thing you knew about a child unless you'd been listening. "I'm not easy," Anastasia said. "I'm aware. I have a legal dispute that may have residual complications for another year. I have a business that is 3 months old. I'm not walking into this with any illusions about what I'm bringing." "You're also bringing yourself," he said. "That's what I'm interested in." She looked at her hands. She turned the tea mug once, twice. He waited, because he'd learned that she needed space inside a conversation the way a room needed air, and closing the space too fast was the fastest way to make her go somewhere internal he couldn't follow. "I'm in love with you too," she said. "I have been for a while." She said it to her hands, then looked up at him. "I've been in love with you since the night you sat in your car outside the shelter for 45 minutes and waited. You didn't have to do that. You could have dropped me and left, but you sat in the car." She paused. "I watched you from the window while I was doing the intake. I didn't know what to make of it." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was in a wheelchair in your living room with 2 bags and a legal crisis, and it seemed like the worst possible time to say something like that to someone." He almost laughed. He didn't, because the moment was too real for laughing. "So you said nothing for 8 months. I was processing." "You were processing for 8 months. I processed slowly." She held his gaze. "I'm very thorough." He looked at her. She looked back. And then they were both quiet for a moment with everything said and the apartment around them and the September night outside, and the particular kind of silence that isn't empty but full. He reached across and took her hand. She didn't pull back. She looked at their hands for a moment, and then she turned hers over so their palms were together, and she held on, not tightly, just present, the way she did everything that mattered. Precisely, without performance. "So we stay," he said. "We stay," she said, "and we figure out the rest as we go. I prefer structured timelines." "I know you do." "But yes," she looked at him. "We figure out the rest as we go." Nadchal. What followed was not a transformation. It was an accumulation. That was the thing nobody said about love when it came slowly and out of necessity. It didn't announce itself, and it didn't arrive in a single moment. It built itself out of small deposits over months, the way interest accumulates in an account you're not watching closely, and then one day you look at the balance and you realize it's become something substantial while you were busy with other things. Anastasia moved the rest of her things out of the corner and into the shared space in the fall, a gradual process that she managed without commentary, and that Ethan acknowledged by quietly clearing the closet space to accommodate it. He did not make this into an occasion. She did not thank him. They both understood what it meant. Maya noticed in the way Maya noticed everything. Suddenly and completely, over dinner one night in October, looking up from her food and saying, "Anastasia, your books are on the shelf now. with the tone of someone filing a significant observation. Yes, Anastasia said, next to Daddy's. Yes. Maya looked at this for a moment. I think they look nice there, she decided. Good, Anastasia said. That was the whole conversation. Victor's lawyers did not appeal. The 30-day window closed in October without incident, and Anastasia's lawyer sent a brief email confirming the ruling was now final, and Anastasia read it at breakfast and said good, and ate her toast, and that was that. The property portfolio was reassessed. 2 of the buildings were sold, the Moscow properties, which she'd decided she no longer wanted to maintain ties to, practically or otherwise. The proceeds were modest after the years of legal suspension, but real. She set aside what she needed for operational capital. She paid off her remaining legal fees. She put the rest somewhere safe and stopped looking at it as a lifeline and started looking at it as what it was, the beginning of something rebuilt from what had survived. Volkova Consulting picked up its 4th client in November, a Chicago-based freight company, Local, which was a first for her. The contract was larger than the previous 3. She hired a part-time analyst, a young woman named Priya, who was finishing her MBA and who had emailed Anastasia out of what she described as an excess of confidence and a shortage of other options, which Anastasia told Ethan over dinner was the most honest cover letter she'd ever received. You hired her because she reminded you of yourself, Ethan said. Anastasia gave him a look. She reminds me of no one. Sure. She's impulsive. I was never impulsive. You proposed a convenient marriage after 7 weeks of knowing someone. That was strategic. He raised an eyebrow. Partially strategic, she said. He went back to his dinner. Partially strategic, she said again, as if repeating it would improve its accuracy. He didn't look up. She ate her food. Stop smiling. I'm not smiling. You're smiling at your plate. The plate is funny. Maya looked up from her food. What's funny? Nothing, Bug. Eat. The conversation Ethan had been carrying for a long time happened on a Friday night in November, after Maya was asleep and the apartment was its winter quiet, the radiator going and the wind coming in around the old window frames in the bedroom. He brought it in from where he'd been keeping it not because it had become unbearable, but because it had become ready, the way some things just become ready when the ground is right. They were in bed. It had become the bed they shared, not as a declaration, but as a gradual fact. 2 people in proximity for enough months that the practical distances collapse, and the light was off, and the room was dark the way it only got in winter when the street outside went quiet. He said, I want to tell you about Rebecca. Anastasia was still beside him. Okay, she said. He'd told her the outline. Wife, car accident. 3 years ago. Maya was 2. The broad facts of it that you had to tell people when they asked. The condensed version that let the conversation move on. He hadn't told her the rest of it, and she hadn't pushed, which had been one of the first things he'd respected about her. She was a high school English teacher, he said. She was funny. She was the kind of person who read the same books 5 times because she said the first time was for the story and the other times were for everything else. He paused. She would have thought you were extraordinary. She liked people who were good at things and didn't apologize for it. Anastasia was quiet, listening. The accident was on a Thursday morning, he said. She was on her way to school. A truck ran a red light and hit the driver's side. He said it the way he'd said it enough times that the sentence had worn smooth, the way grief did to the sharp facts over time. She died at the scene. Maya was with me. I dropped her at daycare. Rebecca dropped her first sometimes, and me sometimes. That day it was me. I'm glad you were with Maya, Anastasia said quietly. I'm glad you were somewhere else. I know. He stared at the ceiling. The hard part wasn't the first year. The first year everyone was there. My mother, her parents, the neighbors, the school people. The hard part was the second year when everyone went back to their lives, and I was still in the middle of mine. He paused. When Maya started asking questions, I didn't know how to answer. When she'd look at the door when we came home, just for a second, the way she did in the beginning because she expected someone to be there. She stopped doing it eventually. I almost missed it when she stopped, which didn't make any sense. He heard Anastasia shift slightly. Her hand found his arm in the dark. Not dramatically, just there. I wasn't I wasn't doing terribly, he said. I want to be clear about that. I was managing, Maya was okay, I was okay, everything was functioning, but there was this particular kind of lonely that's not about being alone, exactly. It's about being the only person who knows your kid the way you know them, the only one who's seen all of it. I had my mother and Mrs. Okafor and people who helped and cared, but there was no one who... He stopped. No one who was in it with me, in the day-to-day of it. Yes, Anastasia said, just that. And then you were, he said. Without either of us deciding that was what was happening, you just were. And I didn't know what to do with that for a long time because it felt like replacing something, which wasn't right, but I didn't have a better word for it. It's not replacing, she said. It can't be. She was herself and I'm myself, and they're not the same space. I know that now. I knew it logically for a while. It just took time to feel true. He looked at the dark ceiling. I wanted you to know about her, properly, not the outline. I'm glad you told me. She would have had thoughts about your business plan, he said. She would have read the whole thing and circled things and asked questions in the margins. She was that kind of reader. I think I would have liked her, Anastasia said. I think you would have argued with each other. Probably. The smallest pause. I argue with people I respect. I know. I've noticed. He turned his head toward her in the dark. I don't want you to feel like you have to be careful around her memory. In this apartment, you're allowed to be here. Fully. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. I know you do. She was quiet again, and then, my father died when I was 27, 2 years before the accident. I didn't handle it well, in the way that people who are very functional sometimes don't handle grief well because they just keep being functional and don't allow the grief to form. She paused. He was the one who taught me the financial modeling. He thought Excel was beneath him, but he also thought I should know everything, so he taught it to me anyway. He said the best executives were the ones who understood every level of the operation and weren't too proud for any of it. He sounds like he was right. He was right about most things and wrong about a few, and I'm still figuring out which was which. She exhaled. I think he would have liked you. He had patience for people who were good at things without performing it. I'm a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. You're a man who stopped at a bus stop at midnight in 14-degree weather because you couldn't walk past a person who needed help, she said. That's what my father would have seen. He was quiet. That's what I saw, she said, from the window of the shelter. You sitting in the car, not leaving. They lay in the quiet for a while. The radiator ticked. The wind moved outside. Downstairs, a neighbor's door opened and closed. The ordinary sounds of an apartment building at night, the background of a life. I'm not going anywhere, she said in the dark. Not as a promise exactly, more as a statement of fact about herself, the way she stated most true things. I know, he said. I want you to know it, she said, not assume it. Know it. Okay. He turned toward her. I know it. She didn't say anything else. She moved slightly closer in the way she did, that small unconscious degree that he'd come to recognize as her version of something she didn't have words for yet. He let it be enough. Maya's first-grade teacher sent a note home in December. It was a good note. He registered that first before his eyes went to the specific thing. A good note about Maya's reading progress, her participation, her helpfulness with other kids who struggled. And then, at the bottom, a brief paragraph. Maya has been sharing a lot about her family this semester. I wanted to note that she seems very settled and happy. She talks about her dad and her mom, Anastasia, with the kind of warmth that tells me she feels very safe at home. You're clearly doing something right. He read it twice. He stood in the school hallway with the note in his hand and the afternoon noise of children leaving around him. He took a photo of it and sent it to Anastasia without comment. She replied in 2 minutes. That's her word, not mine. I haven't encouraged it. He typed back, I know. Does it bother you? The typing indicator appeared and disappeared twice before her reply came. No. Does it bother you? He looked at the note again. At Mom Anastasia, those 2 words in a first-grade teacher's careful email. No, he typed. It doesn't bother me at all. He drove home with a note on the passenger seat and Maya in the back asking about whether axolotls could live in cold water, which he didn't know, and she said Anastasia would know, which was probably true. and he said they'd ask her when they got home. But Christmas that year was small and slightly chaotic and imperfect in all the specific ways that made it real. Anastasia had never done an American Christmas. She said this on December 1st with the air of someone disclosing a condition that might require accommodation. He said it was fine. It was mostly just food and wrapping paper and Maya losing her mind. She said that sounded manageable. She was wrong about it being manageable, but wrong in the good direction. Maya's enthusiasm for the holiday was operatic and unrelenting, beginning in late November with a list she'd compiled independently and presented to both of them at dinner, and escalating through December in ways that involved significant quantities of construction paper and ribbon and at least one attempt to decorate the wheelchair that Anastasia had declined with the firmness of someone setting a clear professional boundary. "Not the chair," Anastasia said. "Just a little ribbon," Maya said. "No." "On the handle?" "Maya, what if it was very small ribbon? What if it was no ribbon?" Maya accepted this with the generosity of a diplomat who had other negotiations in progress. On Christmas morning, Ethan was up first, which never happened, and he stood in the living room before anyone else was awake and looked at the tree they'd bought from the lot on Milwaukee. Maya had chosen it with the authority of someone selecting a general, and it was slightly too big for the corner and had a lean to it that no amount of repositioning had fully corrected. And he thought about the year. He thought about February, the pharmacy bag, the snow, the shape of a person not moving at a bus stop, and the 4-second calculation, and the decision that hadn't felt like a decision at all. He thought about what a year could hold, the legal appointments and the DCFS visit, and the courthouse, and the Swiss ruling, and the first client, and the fourth client, and Priya with her excess of confidence, the mornings and the dinners and the 3 a.m. kitchens, the slow accumulation of someone becoming part of the texture of a life you thought was already set. He thought about Rebecca. He did this without the familiar weight of guilt he'd carried for a long time about the fact that life was still happening. It had taken time to stop feeling like a betrayal, to understand that moving forward was not the same as moving away, that the capacity to love again was not a diminishment of what had been, but an evidence of what it had made possible. She had made him the kind of person who stopped at bus stops. He understood that now. That was her too, in this room, in whatever shape love takes when it becomes the ground a person stands on. He heard the bedroom door. Anastasia came through into the living room, already in the chair, already dressed in the way she was always already dressed before anyone else was properly awake. She stopped when she saw him standing there. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She came to stand beside him, the positioning of someone who didn't think twice about it, and looked at the tree with its lean and its too many ornaments, most of them made by Maya over years of school art projects, lopsided and beloved. "It's a bad tree," she said. "It's the tree Maya chose." "I know." She looked at it. "I like it." "I know you do." She looked at him sideways. "She's going to wake up in approximately 20 minutes, and the noise level is going to become significant." "I know." "I want to say something before that happens." "Okay." She looked at the tree. "This is the first time in 2 years I haven't spent a significant portion of December afraid of what comes next," she said. "I wanted to say that. I don't need you to respond to it. I just wanted to say it out loud to someone, and you're the person I want to say things to. So," he looked at her profile in the early winter morning light, the particular composed line of her and the thing underneath it that was less guarded now, more present, more hers. "So," he said. "So." She looked at him. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." "Merry Christmas, Anastasia." She turned back to the tree. He stood beside her. The apartment was quiet and warm, and outside the snow was coming down again, the same way it had been coming down the night she'd been at the bus stop. But it was a different snow now, a familiar one, the snow of a city that had become hers too. 23 minutes later, Maya came down the hall at full volume, and the morning became what it was going to be, which was loud and messy and full, and Anastasia caught the wrapping paper Maya flung and handed it back with a look that made Maya dissolve into laughter and Mrs. Okafor knocked on the door at 9 with food, because she always brought food, and Ethan's mother called and talked to Maya for 45 minutes, and to Anastasia for 10, and the conversation between them had the easy rhythm of people who had already decided they were in each other's lives. It was not a perfect day. The tree still leaned. Maya spilled juice on the rug, and they dealt with it. One of the gifts was the wrong size and had to be returned. Anastasia had a brief call with Priya about a client deadline and stepped out to handle it, and came back with the look of someone who had just spent 15 minutes being professionally excellent and was ready to eat cookies. It was ordinary. It was fully, completely ordinary in the way that only the right life feels ordinary. Not because nothing in it matters, but because everything in it does. And you've stopped being surprised by it. And the not being surprised is its own kind of arrival. This is what people don't say about the families built sideways, built out of necessity and proximity, and the kind of care that starts as practical and becomes something that doesn't have a smaller word. They don't say that ordinary is the destination, that the whole improbable architecture of it, the bus stop and the courthouse and the spreadsheets at 3 a.m., and the child who draws the same family over and over in different configurations until it finally holds still, is all in service of a Tuesday morning where nothing particular happens and everyone in the apartment knows where they are. Ethan Miller had not been looking for this. Anastasia Volkova had not been looking for this. They had been two people with damaged plans and different kinds of exhaustion and a specific cold Tuesday night in February that neither of them had been able to walk away from. They had chosen each other in increments, first out of necessity, then out of habit, then out of something that grew too large to call anything other than what it was. And the choosing had not been clean or certain or obvious while it was happening. It had been full of logistics and paperwork, and arguments about cabinet doors and burned garlic, and nights when the path forward wasn't clear, and you just kept going because stopping felt worse. That's the thing about the families you don't expect. They don't ask you if you're ready. They ask you if you can manage the next hour, the next morning, the next piece of paper, the next small act of staying. And if you say yes to enough of those, you look up one day and realize you haven't been surviving the arrangement. You've been living in a home. And the home, improbable and leaning slightly to the left, full of crayon drawings and jazz records and construction industry podcasts, and the particular sound of a wheelchair moving through a kitchen at 3 in the morning, the home had been becoming itself this whole time, while you were busy figuring out if you were allowed to want it. They were allowed. They had found their way to it through the longest route, the blocked paths and the rerouted logistics, and the things that should not have worked and did. They had chosen it, all three of them, in their own ways, in their own time. And they stayed.